The Sun Still Shines by Jodi Orgill Brown. Published by Fulfill Publishing. Copyright 2015. Read by the author, Jodi Orgill Brown. Chapter 1. Crossing the Threshold. Leaving the old, both worlds at once they view, that stand upon the threshold of the new. Edmund Waller. Summer 2008 through winter 2009. I am a wimp. My eyes focused on the path before me as I tried to steady my feet from their faltering course. Brittany, my friend, confidant, and jogging partner, glided over the road. I knew my awkward limbs were no match for her elongated, lean legs, or the smooth, mechanical, train-like motion of her arms. Even her ponytail swished from side to side in perfect rhythm with her body. Yet she ran beside me, no matter how slow my pace. So my commitment was to Brittany, not the run. The defeated monologue in my head resigned me again to failure. I hated the notion anyone can run. I searched for the running zen my friends spoke of, but we never met. So I ran for less consequential reasons, to exercise and to be with my friend. All summer, at 6 a.m., our feet drummed the sidewalks before the blistering sun rose and while the grass still smelled of fresh dew. The corner streetlight provided the perfect spot for us to meet, greet, and stretch. It was there, at our starting point, that I secretly began counting down the minutes until each run ended. During every jog, my head pounded, and the world spun around me. I couldn't fathom why otherwise sane people enjoyed the internal tornadoes brought about by the supposedly benign sport of running. It didn't occur to me that maybe the experience differed for others. Excuses for not running during our run became part of my repertoire. I spouted studies about the benefits of interval training and intermittent breaks, and each time Brittany accepted my suggestion to walk or rest. If she saw through my rationalizations, she never said. My beautiful friend just smiled and sailed alongside me. One balmy September morning, we said our goodbyes, and as usual, I walked the remaining block home, then stumbled up the stairs into my house. I nearly collided with my husband, Tolan, on his way out the door. "How was your run?" "I've been going 3 times a week for 5 months, and I still hate it." My breathing hadn't slowed, and my words came out choppy. "Honestly, I feel terrible when I run. It makes me dizzy and lightheaded." Tolan chuckled. "Sweetie, everyone feels crappy when they run. You just have to push through it." He leaned in and kissed my forehead, but pulled away as his arms brushed against my sweaty body. "I better run if I'm going to beat the traffic." He laughed again. "Have a good day." 6 long weeks later, I breathed a sigh of relief when the first big winter storm blew in and dumped 5 inches of fluffy white powder on the ground. No more jogging outside, and no more pretending to be a runner. The diehards kept it up, donning earmuffs, scarves, and gloves as their feet pounded the 2-foot sidewalk paths carved through the Utah snow. My nose dripped and my cheeks burned at the mere thought. The days slowed, lengthened by the absence of warmth and the sun's retreating light. Every dizzy spell drained the normalcy from my life. Something built within me, like a rising thermometer indicating a fever. I knelt on my bedroom floor before Christmas, wrapping Thomas the Tank Engine trains for my toddler, Davin. The room started spiraling around me, the motion so strong I had to lie on the carpet to regain balance. The twirling sensation resumed when I stood. I began to worry in earnest. The incident marked the 5th debilitating spell in only 4 days. The questions stacked like the boxes I needed to wrap. What caused the dizzy spells? Why were they growing more frequent and intense? Could others tell something was wrong? The holiday came, but the answers didn't arrive in a colorfully decorated package topped with bows. In January, I heard a neighbor describe the dizzy spells she experienced from an inner ear infection. I visited my doctor and nudged him for the same verdict. While infections in the middle ear are relatively easy to diagnose, inner ear infections are more difficult to identify. Still, an inner ear infection is the most likely scenario for a young and otherwise healthy person like yourself. Be patient. It can take a few months to heal, advised the doctor. Relieved to have the answer I wanted, I tried to hunker down for a long winter's nap. Tolan encouraged me to take it easy, so cereal replaced a few homemade dinners, and I rested when my toddler did. I consolidated big kid homework time and arranged carpools for soccer and piano. At work, I hid in my office and sat alone at lunch, rather than networking. I had a new position, which meant I was still learning names, faces, and the organization itself. My career as a professional nonprofit fundraiser normally filled me with intrinsic satisfaction. I liked knowing I was helping people in need. But burning headaches cut my conversations short, and stacks of paperwork eclipsed my joy of giving to others. I sat quietly through long meetings and then popped ibuprofen pills before I hurried to get the kids. Still, the headaches intensified. I scheduled another face-to-face with the doctor in February. "You are young and otherwise healthy," he stated again. "The headaches are likely tension migraines from stress." Between 4 children, work, home, and church duties, I concurred with his diagnosis. But when my children blossomed along with the early daffodils, I remained dormant. Each day after getting my kids off to school, I settled down with Davin for story time. We nestled into the couch and combed through the pages of his favorite books. I recited the words to Curious George from memory, so I could close my eyes and keep the vertigo at bay. At the end of March, my family sang, and I blew out candles in the shape of the number 33. The normalcy of my simple life further dissipated with the small flames. None of my careful precautions stopped the rooms from spinning. Moving walls forced me to grip the banister for every marathon down the hall. Pressure built in my head until I thought I would topple. The humming of the refrigerator rang constantly in my ear, adding to the disruptions of my routine. But then I realized the sound wasn't coming from the kitchen. For weeks, Tolan called from the office, multiple times a day, just to check on me. Early in April, he walked into the kitchen after work and stared me in the face. "How are you today?" I avoided his eyes. "Not good." "Something is wrong with you, Jodi." The strain in his voice made my insides churn. He'd never spoken to me in such an impatient tone. I kept my head down and instinctively picked at my nails. Tolan put his hands under my chin and tilted my face up. "It's time we find out what is going on. I don't care that you've been to the doctor twice already. You need to go back again, and this time we are not going to stop until we know." The calendar filled with appointments, tests, and blood draws. Lobbies and cubicle-sized exam rooms captured my time and held it hostage for hours every week, increasing the headaches, but not the answers. A week after an appointment with my family physician and another round of tests, the phone rang and the caller ID read, "Herefordshire Clinic," so I quickly picked up. "Mrs. Brown, this is Jill from Dr. Obayashi's office. I wanted to let you know the results of your blood test came back normal. Everything looks good." As much as I wanted to believe the news, I knew I couldn't. "Everything is not good, Jill. Something is wrong. I need you to ask the doctor what we do next." Her pause told me she understood my insistence. "Okay, hold 1 minute, please." Jill returned to the line. "Mrs. Brown, Dr. Obayashi said the next step is an MRI of your brain. We called McCady Hospital. You are on the schedule for April 27th. They will call you with the details before your appointment." "Good," I exhaled. "Thank you." The phone clicked off. I attempted to retreat to my room, but I made it only a few feet before vertigo forced me to grab the railing. Collapsing onto the floor, I crawled back into the office and called the hospital. "McCady Imaging, this is Anne." "Anne? My name is Jodi Brown. I have an appointment in a couple of weeks for an MRI of my brain, but the words stumbled like my steps. I'm not good. I can't wait that long. All sounds stopped. When Anne spoke again, she whispered, as though telling me a secret. If you can be here at 6:30 tomorrow morning, I can have the tech work you in before our normally scheduled patients. I'll be there. April 10th, 2009. The monstrous machine swallowed my body. The clanking and erratic vibrations rattled me to the core. Why did they even bother with the radio? That's a marketing tactic if ever I saw one. Far from comforting me with music, the bulky headphones barely muffled the clattering of the MRI equipment. Trying to occupy my mind during the 25-minute test was akin to waiting in line for the restroom. No matter what else I tried to think about, only one thing captured my thoughts. When Kim, the radiology tech, finally unhooked the restraint that imprisoned my head, I thanked her for the chance to spend the morning in a claustrophobic box. She grinned. Your doctor will call you in a few days. Her parting words proved false. Kim tracked me down in the locker room a few minutes later. Good, you are still here, she blurted. Since you are the first patient of the day, the radiologist saw your images live, and he thinks he sees a little something. Would you be able to stay for another scan so he can get a better look? I stood motionless. Kim hesitated and then gestured for me to follow her into a glass-encased office at the back of the room. Normally I don't do this, but I think you'll understand if you see for yourself, she said as she pulled up the digital images. She pointed to one specific location. Here is what he's looking at, a little spot outside the right auditory canal. I had never seen a brain scan before. Strange shapes and lines littered the fuzzy image that meant nothing to me. Unsure what to look for, I stared at the monitor. But then, it came into focus. Clearly, something was there. Take 2. After she injected dye into my veins, the exam table slid into the imaging tunnel. A strange calm and unexpected relief flooded me. A spot on my brain. It made sense. I knew something was wrong. The feeling had built for months. The news reassured me that I wasn't crazy. Perhaps it meant a fix to the problem so I could return to normal life. Half an hour later, the jackhammering and muffled music stopped, and the machine spat me out of its gut. The scene replayed as it had earlier. Kim released the restraints and pulled me to a sitting position, and then she crouched until we were eye level. There is definitely something there. Go home and call your doctor immediately. Her tone chased away the relief and determination I'd experienced only moments earlier. We stared at each other, no longer strangers. Her eyes watered as I stood, and she drew me into a hug. Good luck to you. She spoke only those 4 words, but said so much more. I gathered my purse and jacket and turned toward the exit. Looking back, I uttered, "Thanks." Then I stepped into the blinding light of the hospital. I put my hand on the wall and stood statuesque in the lobby. How did I get a spot in my brain? What does it mean? Can I do this? The traffic in the hospital rushed by. It appeared everyone had a green light, but me. Though I wanted to burst into the radiologist's office, I stayed static at the crossroad. The healthcare system didn't work that way. My doctor would have to tell me what the report said. My dear friend and former hospital co-worker, Noli, saw me, still frozen in the hall. She ushered me into her office, and I spilled a few details, probably more than I should have. "Oh my gosh," she said as she covered her mouth with her hand. I looked at my watch and told her I needed to get home. Always a mother bird, she steadied me and then walked me to my car. "Are you sure you can drive home? Let me take you, Jodi. You look pale." She gave me an "I'm worried about you" look and prepared to swoop in if needed. "I'm okay to drive, but thanks." She hugged me, tighter than usual. I got in the car, and she waved as I drove out of the parking lot. The 6-mile drive home required the mental energy for 600 miles. 1,000 questions ran through my mind. Most of all, how I would tell Tolan. I was still analyzing the options several minutes later when I pressed the garage door button and pulled in. Tolan, normally at work by then, had stayed home with our kids during my early morning appointment. The door into the house opened, and Tolan poked his head out and greeted me with his ever-optimistic, cheesy grin. Gray strands speckled his wavy coffee-colored hair, which had receded a few inches since our wedding day, but to me, he was more attractive than ever. Still on autopilot, I removed the key. I sat for a few moments before I climbed out of the SUV and met him on the steps. "How'd it go?" "Took long enough. I thought you'd be home hours ago." I avoided his eyes. "We need to talk." The sound of my heartbeat drowned my footsteps. He held the door open and then followed me into the kitchen. I could hear the kids' giggles in the room upstairs. Tolan and I stood together, the normalcy of the setting in stark contrast to the weight of my news. I took a deep breath and let it out. "Something is there. A spot on my brain." His lips moved, but didn't speak. He looked at me, as if searching for clues, then found his words. "What is the spot? Is it a tumor? Can it be treated? What do we do next? Have you talked to the doctor?" Ever the engineer, he wanted answers, a solution to the problem. But the only knowledge I had was one spot, and the alarmed look in Kim's eyes. "No, I haven't talked to him yet. The tech told me to call when I got home." He grabbed the phone and handed it to me. Tolan stood stationary as I circled the kitchen. "The doctor is in with a patient," the receptionist said. "Can I give him a message?" I pictured a scribbled note stuck in a file at the clinic, but I left a message anyway, ending with, "Have Dr. Obayashi call me as soon as possible." She agreed. Tolan's chest puffed and his back straightened before he wrapped me in his arms and let me cry on his shoulder. The unknown is worse than knowing. You cannot win a battle when you don't know the opponent. Several minutes passed, but I stayed in Tolan's arms because there was nothing else I could do. The phone rang, and he looked at the number. "It's your mom." He handed me the phone and left the room. "Hi, Joe. I haven't talked to you in a couple of days. How are things going?" I hadn't told anyone about the appointment. It had all happened too fast. I paused and tried to find the words. "Mom, I went into the hospital this morning. I had an MRI to see why I keep getting these headaches." The line went silent. "The radiologist saw something on the scan. A spot on my brain. We don't know what it means. I'm still waiting to talk to the doctor. But what I do know isn't good." A sob escaped my throat. "Everything is going to be okay, Joe." Mother mode kicked in. I could hear it in her tone. "We need to have faith that it will all work out." She spoke reassuring words, but I didn't want to hear them. I didn't think she could assure me of anything until we knew what we were facing. At that moment, her guarantees held empty promises. I cut the conversation short and hurried a goodbye with the excuse to free the phone line. Tolan returned, his eyes ever on me. He stood tall and appeared grounded and strong. He's never had a poker face, so either he'd become a better actor or he was more solid than I realized. For a few moments, neither of us spoke a word. He stepped closer and embraced me again. "I'm sure it's going to be okay. Let's just wait until we hear from the doctor." Some wild animal inside me wanted to roar. Everyone kept saying it was going to be okay, but they hadn't seen the spot or heard Kim's words. After the third phone call to the clinic, my body broke into tremors. Of course the doctor was busy with patients. It was the middle of a workday. He was where he should be. Except, at that moment, I needed him more. I needed him not only to call, but also to tell me I was going to be all right. I didn't want the words from Mom or even from Tolan, but from someone who knew. Until the assurance came from him, nothing else mattered. The answers didn't come fast enough. Tolan couldn't wait at home all day. "Call me when you hear anything. I'll be back soon, but I need to go into work, at least for a few hours. Anger welled up inside me as I watched him drive away. My life hung in the balance, and my husband was going to work. He doesn't get it. This could change everything. The garage door creaked closed until the last inches of outside light disappeared. Footsteps pounded above, and I realized I hadn't even seen the kids in the 30 minutes I'd been home. I turned and went back inside to check on the little ones. My 4 young kids danced and played upstairs, happy to be on spring break and out of school. Lindy, at 7 years old, loved being a little mom. She led 4-year-old Kaysen and toddling 2-year-old Davin around in circles, and they giggled to the ground as London Bridge was falling down. Trendon, the oldest, at almost 10 years, watched the game from the couch and then steamrolled the group where they lay on the carpet. The house was still full of people, but I felt empty. The squeals grew louder when Trendon tickle-tortured his siblings on the floor. They frolicked carelessly, oblivious that my world, our world, was falling like the bridge. Part of me was glad they didn't know. I didn't want to interrupt their fun, but I couldn't help but wonder what might happen to their carefree lives. Will I still be able to play memory with Davin and drive toy tractors with Kaysen? Trendon and Lindy can make beds and pop toast, but they are too young to take charge. I can't disappear. I have to be strong. Laughter filled the house as I slipped into the oasis in our backyard. Like a tiger in a zoo, I paced the manicured yard and hoped the splashing waterfall would drown my sobs. The backyard fence caged me in. I wanted to believe I would wake the next day, care for my family, and succor my community. But how would I ever care for others if I couldn't care for myself? I searched for an escape. Brittany, my running partner, came to mind. I pressed speed dial and held my phone to my left ear, a habit I'd formed when I spent hours of my day bouncing babies on my hip. Left hip babies and left side phones freed my right hand from making bottles, stirring, pouring, or cleaning. The pattern stayed no matter how large my babies grew. Brittany answered, and I busied my right hand pulling weeds as I broke the news. Her audible gasp foreshadowed the reaction I expected from others. My friend's sobs joined mine. The sound of her crying pained me. She asked the same questions Tolan and I had asked, to which we had no answers. She too reassured me before we hung up, and the tiger returned to pacing. Time was the infiltrating enemy attacking my mind. The more minutes that passed, the more I needed my doctor to tame my runaway thoughts. Finally, the phone rang. I hopped to my feet when I recognized his Japanese accent. I hoped my favorite family physician would weight the scales in my favor. Mrs. Brown, I just don't know what to say. I am looking at the radiologist report, and it appears there is a tumor or mass between the right auditory canal and the brainstem. The words came faster than I could digest them, so I scribbled as much as I could. Glioma, schwannoma, 8 millimeters. Auditory canal, 7th cranial nerve, 8th cranial nerve, acoustic neuroma. Dr. Obayashi finished by saying he would make some phone calls and let me know what came next. I hung up and ran to Google the unfamiliar terms. The results of the internet search made me gasp. Brain cancer. How to diagnose multiple sclerosis. Brain tumor survival rates. Traumatic brain injury association. Living with cancer. All of the information online increased my sense of dread. The more pages I clicked, the more confined I felt. The probability of returning to normal life seemed frighteningly low. Heaviness settled on me as I read the grim facts. Brain tumors are diagnosed in 1 out of every 28,000 people. Symptoms indicate tumor growth or change. Some brain tumors are non-cancerous, benign, and some brain tumors are cancerous, malignant. Most malignant brain tumors and brain cancers have spread from tumors elsewhere in the body to the skull. No, no, no. Please, no. Tumors can either destroy tissue or cause problems because of the pressure they put on the brain. The description matched my scenario perfectly. I grabbed the arm of the chair. Google caught me in its formidable World Wide Web. What will happen if I get worse? I can barely function now. Will I end up bedridden? How will I take care of little David? How will Tolan manage work and family? Who's going to make Trendon's lunch and do Lindy's hair? What about Kaysen's preschool and carpool, soccer, and piano lessons? The unanswered questions streamed endlessly. I reached the phone and called Tolan, who picked up on the first ring. I recapped what the doctor said, and although he'd only been at work for 3 hours, Tolan went to the parking lot and got in his car as we talked. On that same Friday afternoon of Easter weekend, the doctor's receptionist called back. "We've made arrangements for you to see a neurosurgeon on Monday," she said. "This Monday?" I questioned. "In 3 days?" "Yes, he rearranged his schedule so he can see you in the morning." "Rearranged his schedule? To see me?" A long silence paused the conversation. "Yes, Dr. Obayashi called him personally and explained the situation." "The situation?" I sensed there was something they were not telling me. It can take months for an appointment with the right doctor and weeks to receive test results. Unless conditions are ominous, and then time moves faster than the mind can comprehend. A new door opened in my life, and I had no choice but to walk into the unknown. Only one thing I knew for certain: crossing the threshold meant no going back. I had no control, and that was the part that scared me the most. When Tolan arrived home, I recited the few additional details about the appointment. He didn't say a word. For once, his face didn't betray what he was thinking. I didn't know if he was solving the problem in his mind or trying to hide his fears. He put his arms around me, and for the 3rd time that day, he let me cry on his shoulder. No words of prayer soared to heaven from my mouth that night. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what to say to God. Chapter 2. Into the Unknown. I don't know what is behind the curtain, only that I need to find out. Richard Paul Evans. The family gathering the following day had been calendared for weeks. Our attendance was never in question. Dozens of my extended family sat quietly when we entered the church for the baptism, a religious rite of passage that called for reverence. Only Mom had heard the news from me, but I knew the room held many informed loved ones. I expected the quiet, but not the stares. A few avoided me altogether, but most couldn't take their eyes off me, all while displaying sad, "I'm so sorry, I can't believe this is happening," looks. Grandma Ketchum's face appeared more intense than the rest. She leapt to her feet, walked over and hugged me, followed by Grandpa Ketchum. "We're praying for you," she whispered. I thanked them. The stares confirmed what I'd already determined. I was not the same person as I'd been the morning before. After the baptism, we relaxed together and celebrated the occasion. We talked politics, news, school, and Easter. Conversations were had about every topic under the sun, except one. But even the unspoken words seemed to taint the experience. My sister Tammy doesn't hug. Not normally. But she hugged me that day. As Tolan and I drove home, he quieted the children with headphones and a movie. I closed my eyes in hopes of shutting out the vertigo and settled in for the drive. A strange noise came from the driver's side of the car. At first, it sounded like sniffling, then more like crying. I'd seen Tolan cry, but only once, when his grandmother passed away a few years earlier. Some people deem him callous or insensitive, but the reality is he keeps his feelings inside and in check. But when I heard the broken sighs and muffled whimpers, I opened my eyes, and his tears confirmed it. I reached over and laid my hand on top of his, where it rested on his leg. "What are you thinking?" I asked softly. He wiped his eyes and took a slow breath. clearly not wanting to say his thoughts aloud. I was thinking about how hard it must have been for my Grandpa Pringle to go home from the hospital and tell his kids their mother had died. I was not prepared to hear that. His grandmother passed away from breast cancer when her children were still young. He likely pondered if his family would suffer the same fate. "That is not going to happen. You will not have to do that," I cried out. With all my soul, I wanted to believe what I said. I could not accept any other possibility. But I guessed Tolan had to go there, to begin to deal with the unknown ahead. We didn't talk the rest of the drive. My mom, known as Grandma Oreo to our family, because the little ones couldn't pronounce Orgill, followed us home that night. Mom lived 3,000 miles away, but had been in town for the baptism. Without hesitation, she moved into our home that weekend to do whatever needed to be done. On Easter morning, Grandma Oreo woke early and hid treat-filled eggs so the little ones could still enjoy the day. She handed them baskets and ushered them out the door. 4 little bodies scampered about the yard looking for pastel-colored treasures. Their squeals indicated when they hit the jackpot. Trendon and Lindy sang with the children's choir at church. The songs and uplifting messages rang in my ears, but didn't permeate my soul as I'd hoped. That evening, we went to Tolan's parents' home for dinner. My mother-in-law, Kay, cooked a feast and gave the kids her signature treat, C's chocolate Bordeaux eggs. The grandmas ensured Easter's success. At the close of the day, we gathered our young family into the living room. The children were high on candy, and Kaysen and Davin seemed ready to erupt. Tolan hushed them and waited before he imparted the news. He used kid language to break it down to the simplest form. Mom is sick, and a lump in her brain is causing the problem. Silence fell momentarily, and I searched the faces of my children for their reactions. I doubted if the little boys understood any of what he'd said. "Is that why you guys have been crying so much?" Trendon asked quietly. "Yes, I guess you noticed all the tears, huh?" I said. "Kinda hard not to," he replied. "We don't know what's going to happen, so it's been a little scary," Tolan said. "But tomorrow, we'll take Mom to another doctor to see how to fix the problem. It will all be okay." He did a good job of sounding positive. Tolan's parents came to our house after the talk. Across the room, my mom visited with Kay. Larry and Kay were no strangers to health challenges such as cancer, which made them far wiser than us. I had no idea of how Tolan broke the news to his parents. It was an exchange I was glad I didn't hear. Thank heaven for grandmas and grandpas, whose presence lightened the mood and settled some of the tension in the air. By the end of the weekend, Tolan and I had quickly become experts on brain tumors. We researched every possibility we could think of, and the internet featured thousands of people who survived brain tumors. So despite our initial fears, we independently arrived at a similar conclusion. Most brain tumors appeared manageable. With that assumption, we built a case for optimism and hope. Before we went to bed that night, Tolan took my hand. "We can do this. I read a case online where the patient had surgery to remove the tumor and was back at work just a few weeks later," he said. "Maybe surgery is exactly what we need. You could wake up with no more headaches, dizzy spells, vertigo, or ringing in your ears. Maybe it's the answer we've been looking for." I pondered his words. Yes, maybe this is the answer that will get us back to life. On the day of our first appointment, jitters emerged through my feet. I scurried around the house, but remained upbeat. We were going to find answers. Just as we were walking out the door, the phone rang. The caller stated my appointment was canceled due to a medical emergency. On an ordinary day, that would have been merely an inconvenience. But the appointment had promised escape from the tiger cage, and instead, the door slammed shut in my face. I broke. My buoyant, positive feelings scattered, and I retreated to my room. To them, the rescheduled appointment was simply routine. To me, The prolonged wait foreshadowed devastation. Chapter 3. The Abyss. Life's gonna kick you in the butt. That's what it does. Rochelle Goodrich. April 14th, 2009. Tumors and masses in most of the body are described in grades, 1 through 4. 4 being widespread with rampant growth, life-threatening, and likely fatal. In the brain, everything is considered potentially life-threatening, so it becomes all about location, location, location. Unfortunately, Mrs. Brown, your tumor is in a very bad location. The doctor's words trapped us behind the door of the small exam room and sent rocks crashing all around. Can you operate or do radiation or chemo to shrink the tumor? Can we biopsy to find out more? As fast as questions popped into my mind, they came out of my mouth. The neurosurgeon replied that surgery was too risky because of the proximity to the brainstem. Radiation could activate sedentary tumors, chancing a benign tumor turning deadly. A biopsy would be as dicey as surgery. Chemo was only an option for identified, cancerous, treatable tumors. The boulders fell with each answer and blocked every escape. Tolan, known for being short on tact, heavy on sarcasm, and passionate, to a fault, about even his loosely held convictions, cut to the chase. If this were your wife or daughter, what would you do? Silence. More than 30 seconds passed before the doctor replied. I don't know, he said, shaking his head. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole. Too risky. The knockout punch slammed my hopes. My eyes sought for my husband's, but he looked just as terrified, so I stared at the floor. What does he mean? Nothing they can do? What will happen to me? What about Tolan and the kids? This can't be happening. I will take your case to the cancer board, a group of specialists who take on all the hard cases. Maybe they will know what to do. No answers. More waiting. We left the doctor's office and walked into the hall. My legs started to buckle. Tolan's grasp held me tightly, but no words of consolation came from my husband's lips. The tearful soap opera scene, complete with curious onlookers, imitated sights I'd witnessed when I'd worked as a fundraiser at that very hospital. But until then, I'd never starred in one. As we drove home, I realized I had only known one person with a brain tumor. My coworker and friend, Carol, had married Steve shortly before I met her more than 10 years earlier. By the time they found Steve's tumor, it already covered several regions of his brain. First like a trickle, then a stream. It spread over the healthy tissue, drowning all chance of function or hope. He plunged from healthy and active to bedridden and unaware. Steve's funeral coincided with my eldest son's first day of kindergarten. I sat graveside and watched as Carol buried her husband. She stayed seated after the memorial service, staring at the casket. I waited a few feet away among the tombstones on the lawn. When my phone rang suddenly, I turned away, afraid to disrupt Carol in her grief. I glanced at my watch, 12:30 p.m. The woman on the phone spoke in a harried voice, asking if I were Trendon's mom. A quick shiver raced down my back. No one had picked up Trendon from school. I was at the funeral, and his ride hadn't arrived, so he was left to stand alone on the sidewalk after the other students had gone. I called Tolan at work and pressed him to get there as fast as he could. Staring at Carol, sadness washed over me. I cried for my nervous little boy, and then I cried for Taylor, Carol's little boy, whose daddy would never again pick him up from school. I hated Steve's tumor, hated that it had taken him, changed Carol's life, left Taylor without a father, and left Trendon alone and forgotten at school. As we pulled up to the house, I hoped my outcome would not be like Steve's. Mom bombarded me with questions. I responded as best I could, but I needed to be alone. The facts overwhelmed me. An inoperable tumor was growing near my brainstem, and there were no options to treat it. The devastation hit with hurricane force. I didn't know if I should be mad, fearful, crazy, brave, or a bit of each. But if I were going to be mad, I didn't know who to be mad at, except God. I don't think that will help. It seemed too very real, but opposing forces were at work, both hoping their argument proved more persuasive than their foes. Like the devil and angel atop opposite shoulders, one murmured messages of fear and defeat, the other whispered words of hope and perseverance. This was not my first meeting with the messengers. I recognized them from past encounters. Don't panic. Trust in his plan. I heard the words, but only in my mind. They came from the one I knew to be my guide. As a child, I first thought of my guide as a guardian angel. But as I grew, he became my personal North Star. Some might say the reflections came from my conscience, intuition, or from having a moral compass. But my experience proved him more tangible than that. He trademarked himself through sudden moments of inspiration and gentle nudges in the right direction. When I approached danger, his warning steered me back on course. His voice echoed familiar and comforting. He starred as my personal Jiminy Cricket. I met my guide in early childhood, playing in the woods with my friends. Carelessly running near a hillside's edge, I couldn't see danger, only freedom and fun. As I scampered along the ledge, the dirt gave way beneath my feet. First I slipped, and then tumbled down the steep embankment. Panic seized me. But then, he came. Reach out your hand. Grab on. The voice spoke, and I obeyed. My hand gripped a thicket of brush. The woody sticks poking out of the dirt were just big enough to hold my diminutive frame. I jerked to a stop and hung still until I inched back up the steep hill. Void of injury or serious harm, I started playing again within minutes. I only got a few scratches and would not have died from a drop off the ridge. But that day, I knew some higher force chaperoned me to safety. From then on, I recognized the guide. He never strayed far. When I listened, my journey progressed. When I ignored his whispered petitions, I stumbled. The differences between my guide and his adversary separated them like a canyon, wide and deep. I didn't have a name for the other one, but he brought gloom and despair. He was not menacing enough to be a demon, so I imagined he was a spirit of darkness, an angel only because he was unseen, not because he was good. Whatever form he took, it was a dark force. He usually spoke quietly, uttering phrases like, "That's not fair," and "It's too hard." That day, as I sat in my room, he hollered in my head more forcefully than ever before. "This is the end. You won't make it. Just give up now." I pushed the dark force out of my mind the only way I knew how, by replacing his words with others. The music I turned on calmed me with uplifting words. I didn't know what to believe at that moment, but I knew I couldn't give up before the battle had even begun. The cancer specialists would tell us the next steps. We would wait until then. The song ended. I wiped the tears from my eyes, took a deep breath, and went to read with the little boys. The information jumbled in my mind, and I struggled to know where my time and attention should be spent. No matter how much inner turmoil I experienced, I knew there were a few things I had to focus on. Most of our world, including my neighbors and church friends, were oblivious to my life-threatening health issues. But once word got out, the spark would ignite and spread. I picked up the phone and called Randy, my friend and church leader. Old enough to be my father, his mustached face, broad smile, and gentle eyes always welcomed me. We worked together as volunteer leaders of the teenage girls in our congregation. "Hi, Jodi." Warmth sounded in his voice. "How's my girl?" He greeted me the same as he had every time for the previous 2 years. I don't know exactly what I said, but if words could bruise, they blackened Randy. "What do we need to do?" he asked, trying to contain his emotion. "The girls. I've got to tell the girls, before they hear it from someone else," I sniffed. "I'll take care of it." His voice cracked. "The youth have a game tonight. I'll have them all come over to your house afterwards, about 8 o'clock. Will that work?" "Yes, Randy. Thank you." We hung up, and I contemplated what I would say to the young women coming to my house. Ages 12 to 18, these were my girls. We'd spent countless hours together, camping, playing, in lessons at church, and sitting in my hot tub on their dateless Friday nights. The more time I spent with them, the more I loved them. That night, the room of giggling girls was almost more than I could take. Jamie, Brittany, Emily, Lisa, Megan, Hayden, Jelena, Lindsay, Heidi, Wendy, Jessica, Jeanette, Brenda, Janine, and Amber filled every inch of open space. I hardly knew how to break that kind of news. They chirped away, their conversations sing-songy and carefree. But I knew they understood the fragility of life. They'd watched Nancy, their previous beloved leader, fight and eventually lose her battle with breast cancer. Somehow, I had to show them life was more than a series of tragedies. But I didn't know if I believed that myself. I started speaking before I knew what I was going to say. Considering the emotional day, my words sounded calm, and I hoped believable. The bare facts emerged, and lips started quivering, tears dropping. No one spoke. Too many unexplainable episodes in life had solidified my belief that divine powers are real. That night, I asked the teenage girls to pray and fast to help make a miracle for me. Fasting, going without food, serves a larger purpose than the physical effects of just starving oneself. The participant abstains from eating and drinking and focuses all energy and thought toward God or a specific cause. It requires devotion as well as willpower. I'd fasted many times in my life, but I had never asked anyone to make such a sacrifice on my behalf. All of the young women solemnly agreed. In a spontaneous transformation, they became my leaders. One by one, each girl approached and hugged me. Not ordinary embraces. These heartfelt sentiments overflowed with love and tears. The girls left me encouraged and inspired, akin to the Sandman filling me with pleasant dreams. And for that night, I believed them. I would gratefully brave the battle, rallying strength from my allies. Together we would fight and win. A day could not get any longer. The words from the doctor hung in the back of my mind, but I tried to focus on the positive energy that lingered in the air after the girls left. Tolan and I said goodnight to my mom, who had thankfully already tucked the kids in bed, and we retired to our room. The normal routine took over, and I was grateful for something I didn't have to think about. We crawled onto our bed and met in the middle, facing each other. He propped himself up with one arm and stared at me. "I hope we never have a day like this one again. I guess it can only get better from here. Once the doctor takes your scans to the cancer board, I'm sure we will have answers." His dark brown eyes penetrated mine. As he spoke, I caught glimpses of his almost straight bottom teeth. I admired his striking features, as I had when we first met years before. Emotions welled inside, and I wanted to watch him forever, to memorize every line and bend of his face, and store it in a vault so I'd always have it, no matter what happened. I closed my eyes and inhaled. The scent of his cologne rushed through me, and I saw his face perfectly, already imprinted in my mind. The gentle arc of his forehead, the contour of his jaw, the steep slope of his nose, the curve of his cheeks, and the way his lips thinned when he smiled. Without opening my eyes or touching his face, I felt the stubbles of black hair in the faint shadow of a beard he wore by day's end. All my senses drank Tolan in, and then I opened my eyes to see him again. "What was that?" he asked. "I was picturing you in my head." "In the picture, was I more handsome with more hair than the live version?" He always tried to make me laugh. It didn't always work, but I had a greater appreciation for the fact that he still tried. I didn't want to cry, to ruin the normal yet perfect moment. He put his hand on the back of my neck and pulled my face to his. Our lips met in a gentle kiss. Tolan leaned my head back until it rested on the pillow. "It isn't going to end like this, you know." "What do you mean?" I asked. "When we got married, we said it was forever, and I meant it. But I still want you here, now. This is going to work. It has to, because we have too much life left to live, and we're going to do it together." He wrapped his arms around me and rolled me onto my side until I fit neatly in the contours of his body. We lay there, curled together, as close as we could possibly be. Lying in the safe embrace of his arms, I forced myself to believe him. Chapter 4. Wildfire. A lie can travel halfway around the world, while the truth is putting on its shoes. Mark Twain. The next morning, the phone rang over and over as details of my condition spread throughout the neighborhood. Bad news, as I discovered, travels as fast as any lie. Friends called and expressed love, concern, and offers of help. I started to feel part of something bigger than myself. More than a club or group, I was a member of a pack. Friends and family joined the pack to surround me, protect me, and see me through hard times. Dozens of visitors stopped by, brought meals, cards, and notes of sympathy. They overwhelmed me with love. All packs possess leaders and followers. Some simply obey, but a few step forward and do more. Debbie Rhodes was one who surged ahead. Our friendship started years earlier. Our husbands, roommates in college, set up our first vacation together, a cruise in the Hawaiian Islands. After 10 days of hiding lava rocks in each other's packs, accidentally running red lights, snorkeling with cheap gear, and sunning on the beach, we'd cemented our friendship. The boys lucked out. Debbie and I were notes in the same chord. Since then, we'd enjoyed hundreds of hours together, vacationing and at family barbecues and outings. Tolan wanted her to hear the news firsthand, not through the grapevine. He called and told Debbie the hard truth. A few minutes later, she called me, and we cried together on the phone. Like me, she didn't know what to do. So Debbie did the only thing she could think of. She got in her car and drove over an hour just to give me a hug. "Oh, Jodi, I could hardly see the road through my tears. This doesn't seem possible. I wish there were something I could do." Her feelings resonated with mine. Everything spiraling out of our control. "Brandon and I will do anything we can to help you, Tolan, and the kids. I just love you. I'm so sorry." She set down a basket of goodies she'd brought for the family, and we cried in each other's arms. The fact that she just came will always stay with me. The pack boasted benefits. More than just teaming up to find food, pack animals are social creatures. Without each other, they die. Rather than a pack of wolves or dogs, mine was a pack of angels. They came to my side and never strayed, always close by when we needed something, anything, from meals to rides to hugs and prayers. They changed my life. Just days after our meeting, the neurosurgeon called and reported the cancer board had reviewed my scans, symptoms, and proposed diagnosis. A team of the best neurosurgeons, oncologists, neurologists, and radiologists from the entire healthcare system concurred with the original conclusion. They could do nothing to help me. This can't be real. What do we do now? Am I going to die? The rock slide of news buried me alive. It seemed no answers or hope remained. The devil on my shoulder shouted again, and I gave in to his rants. Things changed. I hid in my room, under blankets and behind closed doors. Tolan didn't smile as often, nor did I. We didn't talk to each other as much either. Perhaps we weren't sure of what to say. After he'd spent hours on the computer researching, Tolan blurted, "We just have to keep looking." He became consumed with what next, and where do we go from here? I used to think he spent forever when he researched cars, snowboards, and vacation options, but those paled in comparison to the time he searched for someone who could help us. Our news went viral. My parents sent messages to loved ones throughout the country. Friends and strangers answered their pleas for help with love, suggestions, comfort, and well wishes. Others' prayers kept us going as we sank into a new reality. Friends inquired at the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, and other renowned medical centers, and rushed the MRI scans to leading specialists. My head was being examined around the world. It's funny who emerges from your past when they believe it could be their last chance to surface. You are never more loved than when mortality stares you in the face. Half of my world was falling apart, but the other half was filling up. My email inbox flooded with messages, as did our mailbox. The doorbell rang multiple times a day, and every cookie, note, and balloon pumped us with gratitude. The care, compassion, and love buoyed us when we would have otherwise drowned. One such advocate approached Tolan just days after the news became public. Tolan and Chris had become friends after working together a couple of years. When Chris approached, Tolan said he could see concern etched on her face. "Forgive me for intruding in your family business," Chris said, extending her arm toward Tolan. "I heard about your wife. I'm so sorry." Tolan acknowledged his thanks. "My husband and I are best friends with a neurosurgeon at the University of Utah. I think he's the one your wife needs to see. You don't have to, but I called, and he said he is willing to see her on Friday during his lunch break." Surprised by the actions his colleague had already taken, Tolan rejoiced at another option. He listened to Chris describe her neurosurgeon friend, a man who took no pleasure in titles, only in the chance to help. Tolan accepted her offer. He called me and then phoned the office and confirmed the appointment for 2 days later. She never said, "Let me know if you need anything." Angels don't ask. They just do. April 17th, 2009. University of Utah Medical Center. Dr. Coldwell chaired the neurosurgery department and had a 3-month wait for appointments. But because of Chris, we'd gotten in after only 2 days. After 15 minutes of asking family history and health questions, he stopped and just looked at the images on the screen in front of him. He stared at the MRI scans for several minutes. I twisted my hands and bounced my legs, waiting for him to speak. His gaze never left the monitor. "I think I can do this." Tolan and I exchanged glances, astonished and hopeful. Dr. Coldwell's methodical approach indicated that neurosurgeons need more than education. They require confidence and courage to do what no one else dares. Dr. Coldwell practiced in New York and California before coming to Utah. He was lured to Salt Lake with grant money to test operating on parts of the brain previously thought to be inoperable. I held my breath that this doctor could be the answer. "I want to admit you to the hospital so we can run tests and find out what this is. It will take too long on an outpatient basis. We can't wait." His decision thrust the medical machine into gear. People in scrubs hurried in. Dr. Coldwell spoke a series of instructions to his team and then told us he would return shortly. Tolan turned to me, his eyes bright but his mouth tight-lipped. "Wow, that was quite the parade. Guess we need to bring you back to the hospital soon." "Tolan, did you hear what he said? He doesn't want us to come back. He's admitting me today. Now." "Now?" We stared at each other, unsure of what would come next. "I don't have anything with me, and my mom's expecting us back," I realized. "I'll call your mom, drive home, and get your things. Your mom will understand, especially if it means we'll get answers faster. I can be back in a few hours." He got up, but his body didn't look like it moved as fast as his mind. "Love you. Good luck. See you in a while." He walked out the door as a nurse entered with a stack of admission papers. "Okay, love you," I called as he sped into the hall. Chapter 5. Testing the Limits. Don't know how I kept going. You just do. You have to, so you do. Elizabeth Wine. April 17th, 2009. We need to find out if the tumor is primary or secondary. Did it start in your brain or spread from somewhere else? The only way to do that is to check. It's an MRI, like you had before, but this time we will scan your entire body. Dr. Coldwell's words were definitive, and like it or not, another MRI was ordered. In my elementary school, there were two kinds of know-it-all students. The first were the loud, hand-always-raised kids, but the second, the quiet, focused ones, actually knew all the answers. I observed Dr. Coldwell's meticulous manner and knew he was the second type, the man to call on for the hard questions. He left so I could change into a faded gown, probably washed 1,000 times and worn 1,000 times by 1,000 different people. I tried not to think about it. I draped myself in the large sheet with armholes, but couldn't tell which side was the front. I guessed and secured the ties that didn't close the flimsy fabric nearly enough to hide me. I walked with a nurse to the imaging room, knowing what was in store. Arm and leg straps joined a head restraint, trapping my entire body as the scanner performed its normal clicks, bumps, and jolts. All I could move were my fingers and toes. The only consolation for the torture was the radio, louder and clearer in this machine than the one I'd been in before. I could actually hear the music in the background. The mirror above my head allowed me to see outside the cylindrical coffin, but the 4-inch static view of the technician room did little to relieve the stress. Open, close, open, close. My hands acted as my physical outlet for movement, but it wasn't enough. I wanted Hulk strength to break the bands and free myself of the prison. I never thought I was claustrophobic, but after more than an hour with my whole body encased in the 30-inch tube, my nerves trembled along with my hands. "Get me out! I can't stay in here another minute!" Then the storm from the machine stopped. Silence at last. "Jodi, we finished the preliminary tests, but I would like to get a few in-depth images while you're in there. Is that okay?" "No, please no." "How long will it take?" I groaned. "Another 30 minutes. A sob escaped my throat and tears dripped, but I couldn't wipe them away. I can't. I'm sorry. I just can't do this anymore. You have to get me out." "You're doing great. You are," the tech encouraged. "Each scan takes 8 to 12 minutes. Can you do one last image? Just 12 more minutes?" 12 minutes. 3 songs. Can I do 3 more songs? "Jodi, can you hear me? Can you do 1 or 2 more tests?" 12 minutes, I cried. "Then I'm done." I tensed and relaxed all the muscles in my body to curb the restlessness. Then I scooted down on the table to settle into a new awkward position. I held a last gulp of air in my lungs before the distress began again. "Okay, here we go," the tech signaled as the machine buzzed back to life. The headphones clicked on, and the first few notes of the music sounded. I stopped breathing for a moment. Billy Joel's song, "This Is the Time," started playing. I wasn't sure if I would laugh or cry. If I had a soundtrack from my life, this song would have been the #1 single. The dimly lit tube transformed as my eyes closed and the music carried me far away from the hospital. Jerusalem, May 1996. The light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling arched windows, illuminating the classroom and reminding us we were in the Holy Land, a land of light beyond the sun. I wasn't the only jittery one. The girl next to me was biting her nails, chipping off the bright red polish that had been untouched moments earlier. A tall guy with an athletic build and too perfect hair laughed nervously and high-fived his neighbor. Hushed conversations took place in small huddles throughout the room. An older gentleman with snow-white hair and a big smile on his face entered the room. In unison, a crowd of chairs and figures turned to the front. Grinning, I scanned the room, remembering my mom's advice at orientation. Have fun and check out all the boys. My dad encouraged me to lose myself in the culture and find my place with God. I intended to do both. The man at the head of the class started to speak. I turned forward in attention. That was the first time I noticed him sitting in front of me. Poor guy. I've heard of a receding hairline, but never starting in the back of the head. The gal who marries him will be plagued by that bad hair for years. The hairless part of his head made me stifle a chuckle. I realized making fun of his hair, or lack thereof, was ironic, especially since I personally suffered from hair attention deficit disorder, otherwise known as hair experimentation syndrome. My long, straight blonde hair had been chopped shoulder length, permed with a light wave, and low-lighted for easy maintenance on the trip abroad. I'd had plenty of hair disasters just in the previous year. Pictures of me with gray, green, and ash brown hair stood as proof, and I hadn't yet forgiven my sister, Christy, for the accidental poodle perm incident of 1989. Still, this guy's reverse balding beat all my fiascos and let me laugh away my jitters. The teacher welcomed the group and then turned a few moments over to the class for eager introductions. There were 40 of us, American students in a university classroom in Jerusalem. The athlete, a high school quarterback star turned college sophomore, was psyched to be there. The nail-biter had just finished her freshman year studying English and had never before left the state of her birth. And the tall guy with the bad hair? Well, he gave himself a graduation gift and decided to do a semester abroad before starting his first job in the real world a few months later. Graduated. More mature than most of these guys. Too bad he's got the hair thing going on. The cluster of faces then stared at me. I popped out of my chair but couldn't think of any particulars interesting enough to announce to the group, so I gave the facts. I'm Jodi Orgill. I grew up in Virginia, but now my family lives in Utah. I just finished my junior year, and I am majoring in public relations. One awkward situation down, dozens more to go. By midday, we were out of class, and the professors encouraged us to gain a real education on the streets of Old City Jerusalem. My new roommates, Erica and Christina, became my sightseeing buddies, and we ventured together into unknown territory. The weathered cobblestone streets bustled with vendors, shopkeepers, locals, tourists, and those on religious pilgrimage. Tall stone walls surrounded the 4 sections of the old city: the Jewish quarter, Armenian quarter, Muslim quarter, and Christian quarter. Hefty rock gates stood as the only entrance to the city within a city. Damascus Gate gained my favor. The main entrance into the city hosted hundreds of sellers ready to serve and bargain with the thousands of people who streamed in and out each day. As we neared the stone walls, aromas of bread and spices wafted through the air, piquing my taste buds, instantly making my mouth water. The tells, we learned, were more than dirt hills. They were earth-covered and grass-covered knolls, sitting atop ruins of homes, towns, and cities of once great glory. Passing by, you could see only a few stones, yet the broken remnants represented lives as real as my own. The great Israeli city, Tel Aviv, the Hill of Spring, took on new meaning as I realized the civilizations that lay under its feet. The foreign sights, smells, and sounds captivated me. The dark-haired men, women, and children captured my heart as quickly as did their homeland. Erica, Jodi, come in. You need shekels for shopping today? The money changer, Aladdin, learned names quickly. He loved the American students and always gave us a good rate and a smile in exchange for our business. On his shop walls were years' worth of letters from past students, whose names and faces he still recalled. Down the street, shopkeeper Omar's hands were worn, but he gently turned olive wood logs into nativities and decorations, exact in every cut. You like wood case for your Bible? Maybe a statue of Jesus for your mother? The businessman knew his clients well and catered to their wants, but his tender care of the wood revealed the salesman was a true master within. I bought 5 nativity sets, his skill and love of the wood evident in each. Beautiful children dotted the landscape. One little girl with curly hair matted to her head spoke softer than the others. She put her hand out like the rest and repeated, "Shekel, shekel," probably hundreds of times each day. Her eyes mirrored a beautiful soul. Generations of families had marked their lives similarly, begging, doing business on a handshake, bargaining for every shekel, and carving lives like wood. For them, it was not a vacation or semester abroad. It was life. Memories of my comfort-filled home hinted of excess. With each day, sight, and new life I encountered, my world seemed to turn outward. Objects and people around me came into focus. I remembered the graduate from the first day of class, when I'd laughed at the back of his head. But it took me over a month to really see him, and by then, I was changed. Standing in awe at the base of Mount Sinai in Egypt, we prepared for a night hike to the summit, the only way to survive the desert's blazing heat. Atop the peak, we would watch the sunrise, the very same mount where Moses had seen the burning bush and conversed with God. The jagged rocks before us looked imported to our planet. We formed a large circle, and he stood next to me as all 160 students from our university program sang songs of praise and shared hopeful devotions for our journey. We didn't exchange words. We just moved in time to the poetry of the lyrics and the music. Extending arms around our neighbors, we offered thanks and a heavenward petition for safety. When the graduate fitted his arm around mine, his hand settling gently on my bicep, electricity pulsed through my body and hit me with a small shockwave. I glanced at him, but saw only the shadow of his face against the setting sun. The shade masked his features, just as the mountain peaks masked the climb ahead. His hand lingered on my shoulder for a moment after the close of the supplication, but even then I couldn't imagine how my whole life would change because of the touch of his hand. The machine jolted and I jumped. My mind flashed back to the present. The Billy Joel song had ended, and my Middle East oasis disappeared with it. How long has it been? It must be almost time. The MRI scanner paused, and I hoped it was over. But seconds later, the roadwork sound started again. I willed my mind back to the warmth, the light, and the faraway lands. The desert wind hit my face. The weight on my shoulders and back lightened. Surprised, I looked around in time to see a sizable-framed guy with a black shirt and hair to match fling my backpack over his shoulder and launch up the hill. Skinny, helpless white girl, looks like you were an easy target, Jodi. My friend Kim tossed her head back and giggled. Lucky girl, I wish it would happen to me. The pack and the offender disappeared in the sea of foreign trekkers walking up the holy mountain. Just when he vanished into the crowd, his face registered in my mind. Chris. I knew he was from our university group, but I hadn't met him yet. 100 yards up the path, the perpetrator's face broke into a grin. His eyes caught mine, and he took off again. Nice. Chris is carrying my backpack up the mountain. Kim's right, I am lucky tonight. The culprit and his friends were notorious for plucking packs off unsuspecting female students. The guys made a good impression with a little act of service and forced a second meeting with their incredulous victims. Without the pack, my pace quickened. Hundreds of hikers separated into groups, spread all over the mountain. My group middled the pack, but another group of students had started only 5 minutes earlier. Come on, Kim, let's catch up to the next group. They should be just ahead. Ha! Easy for you to say. You probably feel light as a feather. No thanks, I'll stay with this crowd and meet you and your backpack hero at the top. Try not to get engaged before you reach it. Kind as his little gesture was, I had no interest in Chris. My thoughts were on the steep hillside in front of me. Breathing and climbing got easier, and soon I passed the leader of my group and began to jog to the next. My moderate pace did not last long. The burn caught in my legs and slowed my stride. Hundreds of yards up the dirt trail, the turn of the path found me alone and surrounded by darkness. I could see neither the group ahead nor the one behind. Instinctively, I grabbed for the flashlight in my pack, but caught only the sleeve of my shirt. My supplies were in my bag. No light or water. The blackness worried me, and I decelerated further. Thousands of people hiked the mountain, yet few sounds echoed in the distance. Isolation tricked my mind, and fear crept into my thoughts. Voices argued in my head, my guide and the dark spirit. The foes faced off in silent battle in the Egyptian night. The dark force sent chills down my spine. I tried to silence his speech. The guide urged me forward. I heard his voice and knew I had to act or I would stumble. Then they both stopped, waiting for me to choose to run back down the trail to comfort and security, or walk forward through the blackness by myself. The choice seemed obvious. Though I preferred the relative safety and comfort of the group below, some mountains can only be conquered alone, in the dark. Listening to the last of my guide's whispers, I chose to talk myself up every inch of the mountain. Jodi, you're not really alone. Just keep walking. Don't stop. My muscles wearied, but I pushed on, prodded by my guide's instruction. The route steepened, forcing me to rest in between each physical push up the path. The mountain peak seemed farther with every bend of the trail, and my doubts grew. The dark angel on my shoulder pressed me to quit and succumb to the gloom. The fiend's silent tirade grew louder with each moment. He seemed intent on testing my determination and faith in myself. I wondered how long I'd been climbing. The summit had to be close. My eyes looked heavenward. Please, just let me find someone. I can't keep going alone. One switchback gave way to another, and the dark force gained ground. Finally, Providence interceded. A long stairway indicated salvation was close. After 750 steps, I would be at the top. No stopping this close. At base camp just hours earlier, tales of the staircase had unsettled me. I wondered how difficult the steps would be after hours of hiking the steep terrain. Reality turned out only marginally better. Trudging up the stairway became a full-body activity. The veil of darkness started to lift. No longer in the shadows of the mountain passes, the steps turned from black to gray to brown. Laughter floated in the air. I was almost there. A final turn of the staircase, and the throng of students at the summit swallowed me into their midst. The solitary journey ended. I saw Erica, Christina, and several others, and then I spotted Chris and my pack on his back. Sunrise lit the horizon and chased the blackness away. The light illuminated hundreds of miles of celestial peaks, which sparkled like jewels on a crown. The dark spirit had gone, but a strange feeling crept into my stomach. It was not the last time I would face that foe. The great mount had protected hundreds of sojourners that morning. The 6-foot graduate arrived like the rest of us, but he slipped into the swarm without drawing my attention. 24 hours and 1,000 miles later, in Amman, Jordan, he appeared at the threshold of my hotel room. I opened the door, shocked to see him standing there, alone. Shadows no longer veiled his face as they had when he'd stood next to me at the bottom of the mountain. I caught my breath as I realized he was quite handsome. His short, dark chocolate hair was combed neatly to temper the light waves at his temples and around his ears. With olive skin and dark brown eyes, he could have blended in with the Middle Eastern natives. He looked foreign, distinguished, memorable. I wondered why I hadn't noticed him since that first day in class. The graduate's name was Tolan Brown. My whole being coursed with energy at the sound of his voice. "Ever seen Amman before?" he inquired with a casual grin. "We are only in Jordan for one night. Now's our chance." He raised his brow, waiting for a response. Something in his expression grabbed me and wouldn't let go. Unlike many of the guys I'd met, he was calm and comforting, not anxious or over the top. My eyes stared for a second too long. I still hadn't answered. What is it about him? He's different. I guess it is now or never. Tomorrow will be too late. Something about the "this is our only chance" offer persuaded me. I smiled and hoped for the best. Invitation accepted. Amman was alive, but restrained. Tanks rumbled down the streets, reminders we were far from Kansas. The clean and organized city astounded me, but it wasn't the location that held my attention. I haven't tried to keep up with the reading assignments. Why would I spend time sitting in my room reading about history when I could be in the old city seeing it? Tolan said matter-of-factly. Every word he said resonated with me. His philosophy didn't seem to apply just to the university semester. Turned out, Tolan's long-ago bad hair was just a botched haircut by his father, who got carried away with the clippers. Engineering degree in hand, the start of his first real job neared. With freedom still under his reign, he had boarded a plane bound for a distant land and personal discovery. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything and nothing at all. The topics changed from our homes and families to the unique sights and sounds of ancient lands. "You know the model they showed us of Jerusalem after the Babylonian siege?" He actually recalled and understood the hours' worth of material the tour guide spouted. His detailed descriptions of places and events seemed alive, and I wondered how they appeared in his mind. We stopped by a recognizable American restaurant, thrilled to order pizza. He interacted with foreign businessmen as if they were old friends. He laughed easily, but not at the same things everyone else laughed at. The food fell short of our expectations, but the adventure did not. The more time we spent together, the longer our fingers intertwined, the harder I fell. He didn't wait for happiness. He savored the journey of real life every day. It only took 3 days before I knew I would marry Tolan Brown. Even before the ring slid on my finger, we were a perfect fit. The MRI still held me hostage, but the words of the ballad that became our song continued to comfort me long after they faded on the radio. This is the time to remember, but it will not last forever. These are the days to hold on to, but we won't, although we'll want to. This is the time, but time is going to change. Memories streamed through my mind, and I thought about how much that trip had changed and guided my life. The semester abroad to the Holy Land led me to love. But the Middle East also opened my eyes to human suffering, corruption, and horrible living conditions. Amidst the wonders of the world in Egypt, we traveled through the dirt-covered streets and waded through pools of urine. We unknowingly drank bacteria-filled water, which caused our bowels to cramp and ache. We watched children bathe with cattle in the Nile River, a body of water so contaminated our leaders told us not to touch it, not even with our feet. On the paradoxically clean streets of Jordan, soldiers patrolled, threatening anyone who appeared to step out of line. 2 tanks of military personnel stopped a group of American students less than a block from where I stood. Frightened college kids put their hands in the air and tried to back away, only to have the soldiers jump from the tanks and confiscate their cameras. It seemed they wanted to curtail any unauthorized images from escaping the country. I wondered which people were more free, those who lived in the filth or those who cowered in the cleanliness. When I had boarded the plane for Israel, I was well into my university studies. I'd always desired a career that would make a difference and afford me the opportunity to have a family. I didn't want to be trapped in the rat race and forget the real meaning of life. But when I witnessed the conditions in Egypt and Jordan, I became more determined to do something good in the world, something for others. I arrived home from the Holy Land with a new goal: to work for a hospital or a nonprofit, an organization with a purpose to help others. Tolan and I married just 4 months after we returned to the States. He worked in the real world, and I continued my university studies. Our daily destinations were nearly 90 miles apart, so we split the difference and lived in the middle until I finished school. We rented small apartments in crummy neighborhoods until I graduated, and then we bought a little starter home. Just 18 months later, I left my public relations job at a high-tech company to start a career as a professional fundraiser for a nonprofit hospital system. For 10 years, I worked with people around the country, raising money for programs that could indeed change lives, if not the world. During the early years of my career, I gave birth to Trendon, and soon realized one of the best ways to change an ever-declining world was to teach my children to be good, moral people who loved easily. As I had planned, I scaled back in my job to be home with my children. My career became secondary. I worked at home during nap times and often carried babes in arms to meetings at the hospital. Tolan stayed by my side the whole way. Times certainly had changed, just as our song had predicted. But despite the recent events, and even the fact that I was lying in an MRI scanner, I was grateful for every moment and knew I wouldn't change a thing. The jerking machine stopped and jolted me back to reality. I made it. The motorized exam table moved out of the tunnel. My arms and hands shook as I waited to be free of the claustrophobic tube that caged me for almost 100 minutes. I survived the last terrible minutes because my mind whirred me thousands of miles away. When the MRI exchanged places with the new machine for more tests, my head dropped. The neurosurgery residents raced around in ant-like fashion, filling infinite clipboards with the answers I had already given 10 times before, each wanting the whole story for themselves. It was a teaching hospital. That meant the best doctors, but also hundreds of curious newbies who were sure to learn a lot from my unusual case. The entire day I'd been stuck to a needle, a bed, or a machine. I longed to escape, but I wanted answers more, so I stayed. At 8:30 p.m., a CNA finally pushed me in a wheelchair toward my room for the weekend. Tears fell, and I heaved uncontrollable sobs. We arrived to a crowd huddled in room 521. I jerked up straight and wiped my face at the sight of my family. Tolan had brought the children to visit, along with supplies for my stay. Trendon saw me, then turned to Tolan before looking back at me. The kids knew Mommy was sick, but my wheelchaired body and tear-stained face likely woke them to a new reality. My whole world revolved around my family, but at that moment, I could hardly bear the scene. Expectant little faces stared at me, and I attempted to pull myself together for their sake. Trendon's normal, gregarious chatter quieted. He understood more than we were telling him. Lindy touched my hand and then backed away. Kaysen and David waited until I climbed into bed, then they jumped aboard to cuddle. Tolan's eyes were perhaps the biggest and most telling of all. Without exchanging words, he understood the visit must be brief. They left my overnight bag on the counter, and the kids made sure I knew my toothbrush was inside. "Give Mom hugs, then we have to go," Tolan announced. "But we just got here," Kaysen insisted. "Everyone who obeys without fussing gets ice cream when we get home." Tolan, ever the marketing expert, charmed them into submission. Little bodies ambled forward and extended loving arms around me. Their squeezes comforted me, but I relaxed only when my tears fell privately again. The tumor diagnosis was only days old, but already it had stolen my normal, beloved life. At 9 p.m., I rolled over to sleep, but that was not what the doctor ordered. A senior resident, almost a real, full-fledged doctor entered, for the third time. He'd bugged me from the first hands-on hip stance and I know what I'm talking about speech, an attempt to compensate for his nasal voice, short stature, and balding head. Earlier in the day, he'd questioned me for 15 minutes and then declared I had multiple sclerosis, a terrible disease that had killed my uncle, and asserted I should be glad for an MS diagnosis and not a brain tumor. The shock had ripped through me like shrapnel. Other residents hit me with 2 more diagnoses before Dr. Coldwell advised me not to listen to the almost doctors. If only I'd known that at the start of the day. Eager, freshly studied residents watched vigilantly for a chance to demonstrate mastery that would distinguish them from their peers. A few spouted every idea that popped into their minds as if not knowing when not to speak. Outside of the watch of their professor's eye, they tested their theories on patients, perhaps unaware of the impact on unsuspecting patients and families. My emotions rode a roller coaster the whole day, thanks to the unanticipated events and a few zealous residents who shared their vast knowledge with me. The assuming resident's bald head mirrored his bedside manner, sparse and unconvincing. One more test, he insisted, then I could sleep. He put on gloves and pulled out a needle nearly the length of my arm. "With this, I can extract spinal fluid to assist in the diagnosis process," he declared. "Not this arrogant jerk. Don't touch me. Get out of my room. Leave me alone." I yelled and yelled, but he never heard the words in my head. I abandoned my silent fight and imitated the image he showed me. Curled into an unnatural position, I gripped a pillow while he inserted the needle into my spine. Fluid drained into clear sacs to be tested for diseases and conditions associated with brain tumors. The procedure lasted fewer than 20 minutes, but moments after, a headache drilled in. I begged for sleep. A nurse gave me water to wash down several medications, and then the room fell quiet and dark. In the minutes before I fell asleep, I pleaded there would be no sequel to the event. Chapter 6. Surrounded. But if these years have taught me anything, it is this. You can never run away. Not ever. The only way out is in. Juano Diaz. April 21st, 2009. 3 days had passed since my hospital release, with no relief from the new headaches pounding my head. Our appointment with Dr. Coldwell lasted 3 days. I returned home Sunday as a sick patient. Stacy, a friend and nurse, came when she heard the news. She marched into the living room and seated herself on the floor by the couch where I rested. 2 weeks ago, I was planning a charity golf tournament. Now, I'm barely functioning. I just want to press rewind on life, I said. We never know when life will change, Stacy replied. Her CrossFit workouts reflected her personality, intense in exercise and life. Stacy makes things happen. Nothing passive about her. She heard my symptoms and assumed immediately a spinal fluid leak created the latest headaches. A blood patch, a simple surgical procedure to seal the spinal tap puncture wound, should solve the problem. With Stacy still kneeling on the floor, the doorbell rang and my pack grew. Catherine, also a nurse and friend, agreed with Stacy's diagnosis. The two didn't know each other, but they put their heads together on my behalf. Catherine phoned a doctor, explained the situation, and arranged for the patch procedure. At 6 p.m., they set miracles in motion. The next morning, Mom wheeled me to the surgical floor of the hospital. My friends had called in favors and even gotten babysitters. They made everything happen. The situation at the hospital resembled no other. The procedure had not been authorized by my insurance, and no doctor had given orders for surgery. Yet the doctor, Catherine's colleague, did not hesitate. In an unused operating suite, he helped me lie face down on the surgical table. He and a nurse readied the tools. Doctor, we are here to perform a blood patch procedure on Jodi Brown. Do you concur? The nurse asked. Yes, he replied. We better write this down somewhere. Get me a paper to sign. The operating room nurse handed the surgeon a paper and pen, and he scribbled his name and returned them to his assistant. What do you want me to do with this? The nurse asked, holding the signed paper. The computer doesn't even show she's here. Hold on to it, for now. You can give it to me later. I'll keep it, just in case. The nurse's face didn't reveal his personal thoughts. He simply complied, folded the paper, and placed it in his pocket. He then prepped me, rubbing my back with cleansing wipes and alcohol. The throbbing blared in my head, akin to a car alarm stuck in panic mode. I wondered if you could pass out from pain. Everything in the expansive room, except the floor, was metal. Tables, instrument, and light fixtures. Easy to clean. Sterile. Only the four of us, Mom sitting on a nearby chair, occupied the suite. Dim lights reflected off the shiny equipment, creating a haunted effect with the shadows. The darkened room cocooned me from the aches inside. We are so grateful for your help, Mom said for the second time in just minutes. The doctor knelt down and looked into my eyes. We're ready to begin, okay? Okay. A needle pierced my skin, and a local anesthetic deadened the midsection of my back. I felt pressure, but no real pain as they patched the spinal fluid leak. Several minutes into the procedure, liberating calm soothed my head as the blood coagulated in the dura of my spine. The surgeon finished the procedure in less than half an hour. Without a recovery room scheduled, he and the nurse arranged a place in the OR, covered me with blankets, and took turns by my side. I laid on the makeshift bed, recuperating for 2 hours, our presence still secret from the hospital bustle. I didn't know little miracles like this could even happen these days, Mom said as she held my hand. My words echoed her sentiments. Can I give you a hug? I asked the doctor as I stood for the first time in 5 days. He stretched out his arms, the answer I'd hoped for. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Are you feeling better now? He asked, releasing me. Yes, so much better. Then we did the right thing. He patted my shoulder, turned, and waved as he walked into the office on the other side of the OR. Mom held onto my arm as we walked out of the hospital. On the car ride home, a radio announcer confirmed a report that Michael Jackson had died earlier that day. Shocked by the news, songs from my youth played, first on the radio, then in my mind. For days, I'd focused all my strength on surviving the pain. Billie Jean was a welcome departure. Balloons and signs greeted us outside our home, but the party wasn't for me, but for my youngest son, Davin. His birthday arrived without asking us if it was convenient and caught me totally unprepared. Mom slipped away and returned with a big, "Happy birthday, Davin," decorated chocolate cake. Catherine arrived with a cotton candy machine, which attracted neighborhood children by the sight and smell alone. Neighbors partied our yard with more balloons, and kids from the cul-de-sac showed up right on time, desperately needed gifts for the birthday boy and his mother in their hands. Though I hadn't purchased a single present or sent one invitation, youngsters and parents alike celebrated Davin's second birthday in our front yard. He may not have understood exactly what was happening, but he knew he was loved. When the festivities were over, the families wandered home, but left us food and treats. Catherine packed her cotton candy machine in the car. She came first and left last. There was no doubt she'd organized the party, and it was no coincidence she'd been the one who'd called the doctor and arranged for the blood patch procedure. She didn't just know doctors because she was a nurse. She was also a patient. And she went from being their colleague to being their patient in the middle of a shift at work. Half a decade earlier, while her fellow nurses and doctors were in the operating room, Catherine stepped out of the OR and into the hall. Something felt off. Her heart was beating irregularly. When the doctor realized she'd been gone a little too long, he sent someone to check on her. They found Catherine lying on the floor, unconscious. Her friends quickly rushed to her aid and called for help. But no matter how long they pumped her chest, she wouldn't wake up. If they hadn't been my dear friends, they probably would have called it much earlier. But I don't think any of them could stand the thought of having me die on their watch. They didn't want to give up on me, Catherine told me. She lived through the ordeal, but not by much. When her heart finally began to beat again, the doctors believed she would be gone again in a short time. They figured the time without oxygen and the trauma to her body meant she had only enough time left for her family to say goodbye. Catherine's husband brought their baby girl and Catherine's other young children to the hospital in the middle of the night to say goodbye to their mother. No one really had any reason to hope I would ever recover. They thought I wouldn't make it until the next morning. But she did. And she made it to the next day and the next, until her body slowly started functioning again. The injury was extensive, and her heartbeat still irregular, but she'd survived a full-blown cardiac arrest. Some damage was permanent, others took years to repair. She tired easily afterwards and wasn't able to exercise, hike, or even jog to the corner. A little trip like that could be her last. And yet, Catherine's heart, the one in her soul, wasn't damaged at all. Her weak heart made her strong. I guessed that was why Catherine was everywhere, doing everything for others. That is why she is here. She knows just how precious life is. You need anything else? She asked as she closed the back of her SUV. I shook my head. No, we're good. And Catherine, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. It was no big deal. Every little one should have a birthday party. She smiled and waved as she drove off. The pack of angels, led by the Queen herself, rescued me again. The hospital still looked and smelled new, though the facility was 7 years old. As I walked to the imaging department to pick up a CD of my MRI scans, my mind filled with memories from the years I'd worked there, instead of all my recent trips. I remembered the VIP celebration just before the medical center opened to the public. For years, the fundraising staff worked with community members and businesses to raise the money for the much-needed new facility. The $16 million we were tasked with raising was less than 10% of the cost of the hospital, but it was no trivial amount, especially for a relatively small community like ours. At the VIP event, my boss, mentor, and friend, Joey, called me to the podium and thanked me for my work on the campaign. Fully 9 months pregnant with my second child, I ambled through the large crowd, accepted my flowers, and blushed at the applause. A big thank you to Jodi for all her hard work. She has gone above and beyond in her efforts to create public awareness and help raise funds for the hospital. In fact, you all know that she is expecting a baby any time, but she is still here working, even though she is dilated to 5 centimeters right now. She is glad several among us tonight are doctors. She could be the hospital's first patient. Joey had laughed and the crowd cheered at the announcement. I wanted to duck off the stage, walk past my seat, and straight out the door. But Joey had been right, to a degree. Nothing but birth or death would have kept me from that gathering that night. It represented years of personal investment and thousands of work hours, but I'd loved every minute. I did believe the new hospital would transform healthcare in our community, and so I'd asked hundreds of people to donate to build it. Joey led the charge, and I sidekicked. My contractions gained strength right after the event ended. By the next afternoon, they timed at just a few minutes apart, so I called Tolan at work. We trafficked the busiest street in town, desperate to get to the hospital. Tolan off-roaded to get us around cars stopped at a light. The drivers likely assumed him crazy, but as contractions hit me, I became a willing accomplice to his questionable maneuvers. Minutes later, I was pushing when the doctor walked in the labor and delivery room and caught my baby girl. Despite the celebrations for the facility, the new hospital wouldn't open for a few more days. Lindy's birth was our personal finale with the old McKay-D Hospital. I arrived at the imaging department waiting room and back to the present day. Every doctor we talked to wanted full-resolution copies of the MRI images, so I collected them. After my pickup, I made a quick decision and turned left into radiation oncology. Is Paul Waite in today? You're in luck. He's here, and not even on the phone. Go on back. I walked in, and Paul turned toward me. Well, if it isn't Jodi Brown. He gave me a huge toothy grin and literally bounded out of his seat. His enthusiasm was his most endearing quality. Paul seemed to live on an invisible trampoline, and I had never been happier to join him. As the head of the cancer radiation therapy department, he'd teamed up with me for fundraising efforts. But more than colleagues, we were dear friends. We chatted for a few moments before I got down to business. If anyone would have advice or know whom we should call, Paul would. The tumor is between the right auditory canal and the brainstem. Because of the location, the neurosurgeon said it is inoperable. Paul's eyes bulged before he said anything. He was an expert at this. If he was anxious, I should be too. Neurosurgeon. Which one? Dr. Summers upstairs? I nodded. Gamma knife. Did he say they were going to use gamma knife? He didn't tell us about gamma knife. I don't know what that is. Paul leaned in and put his hand on his knees, showing the concentration of an athlete before a big game. It is a form of radiosurgery that focuses tiny beams of radiation to kill tumors. It is often safer than brain surgery. Sometimes gamma knife is an option when surgery isn't. Relief wet my forehead like a cool sponge. I knew I was coming to the right person. You have all the answers, Paul. Not all of them. The break from my worries didn't last long. Wait, is gamma knife normal radiation? He didn't think radiation was an option because the tumor type is unknown. Does that make sense? Paul returned to his athlete look, unusually silent for a moment. Radiation works on cancerous tumors or other malignant cells, he explained. It is dangerous to radiate benign masses because of the possible destruction of healthy tissue and the chance of triggering radiation-related cancers. And benign tumors don't respond to radiation treatment. So Dr. Summers is right. If you don't know what it is, you can't use radiation. He did say something like that. So benign cells can turn cancerous if they are radiated? That is a simplistic explanation, but yes. The back and forth questions continued in a water balloon toss fashion, both of us careful not to burst the bubble. More than 30 minutes passed before the receptionist appeared at the door. Your 1:30 appointment is here. Paul nodded and I stood. Jodi, this is going to be a long, hard road. You've got to be ready for it. A stoic expression replaced his normal, cartoon demeanor. I'm doing everything I know how to, Paul. I know you are. Please take care, and let me know what you find out. If it's okay with you, I'll talk to Dr. Summers and make some calls to see if I have any leads on this end. Thank you, my friend. Paul's larger-than-life figure neared, and I reached up to hug him again. After several moments, he released me, and I grabbed my purse and CD and turned away. I felt the weight of his stare as I walked into the hall. My most optimistic friend hadn't pumped me full of his conquer-the-world attitude and buoyancy for life. That made my stomach turn. When Tolan got home, I replayed the conversation. Well, we know we have good people on our side. If Paul thinks of anything that will help, he'll let us know, Tolan said. Yes, he will. I knew that was true. I couldn't get the exchange with Paul to exit my brain. Before bed, Dad called for the daily update, and I repeated the event. Don't let that get you down, Joe. Anyone who knows you knows that you are going into this with everything you've got, and you're going to come out of it the same way. A moment passed before it hit me. That's just it, Dad. Paul does know me. I thought of myself as a glass-half-full person, and despite all the bad news of the week, I still believed we'd find a solution, and I'd be back to normal in no time. Did Paul doubt that? He'd info-dumped more facts than I could digest, yet he held back too. I could only imagine what he didn't say. The doorbell rang and a huge cookie bouquet arrived from my Orgill cousins. The vibrant, tempting delivery quickly disappeared into little mouths, but the impact lingered longer. Our home felt like a train station, with people coming and going at all hours, bringing parcels of various sizes. Our phones and email inboxes filled with calls and notes. We could not possibly communicate with everyone who was worried or wanted to help. A blog answered the dilemma. Step-by-step tutorials walked me through the process of creating a real-time virtual bulletin board. If anyone needed a miracle to survive, I knew I did. So we launched the aptly named A Miracle for Jodi Brown blog. Almost as soon as the site went live, comments and messages poured in, channeling hope, new friends, and strength directly to me. The blog published all the details of our condition and needs to our family and friends, but it also made our lives public. The more commotion, the more Tolan retreated. He liked privacy, and despite the helpfulness of the blog, it invaded his personal space. The balance beam of our lives narrowed by the minute. One afternoon, Annette, my neighbor and dear friend, sat by my bed as I rested. I am numb. I feel nothing at all, then everything at once. The pressure, the fear, the unknown, I muttered. What are you going to do? The doctors still don't know what it is, so we don't know where to go from here. I'm not mad. I just don't know where I stand. My whole life, all my relationships have changed, and I am in control of almost nothing. Oh, Jodi, I'm so sorry. I can't. I guess she didn't know what to say either, so she put her arm around my shoulder, and we just cried. Annette and I had been pregnant at the same time, and our youngest boys were born exactly 3 weeks apart. Suddenly, I faced the possibility that she would be able to raise her little boy, and I? The prospects pulled me apart. I realized only one person could put me back together. 3 weeks after I stopped praying, I grabbed my journal and wrote my thoughts. May 4th, 2009. I have decided that today is the day. I am sick of feeling out of control, sad, and out of touch with the Lord. I may not understand all I am going through, but I can make the best of the situation. Today, I want to start living, no matter how much time I have. Today I am finally ready to seek the Lord again, ask for health and strength, and even miracles. The truth is, the miracles have been coming since word of my condition started getting out. That is what has kept me and the family going when I felt I didn't have it in me to face one more day. I closed the journal and set it on my dresser. Then I knelt at my bedside and resurrected my conversations with God. Chapter 7. Jumping in. Courage stands halfway between cowardice and rashness, one of which is a lack, the other an excess of courage. Plutarch. May 7th, 2009. The good news is you are young, active, and healthy, so the likely prospect is for a full recovery. Tolan and I sat in the exam room of another specialist's office. Dr. Shelton appeared distinguished, with wavy salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a closed smile. He spoke with a drawl. Texas, I guessed. Chief of head and neck surgery, he seemed cautious but confident. Dr. Coldwell recommended him as a surgery partner so they could tag team the tricky procedure to remove the tumor. The two were colleagues, experts, and friends. The decision was made. After 3 weeks of tests, hospital stays, endless appointments, and hundreds of questions, surgery was set for the following week. My personal dictionary filled daily with brain tumor-related terminology. I tried to manage all the information, but the task overwhelmed me. As with any procedure, there are possible risks and side effects, Dr. Shelton said, handing Tolan a brochure of the surgery's potential hazards. Most common side effects from craniotomy. Risk of hearing loss, plus or minus 5%. Risk of facial paralysis, plus or minus 10%. Increased dizziness and imbalance, more so than at present, plus or minus 30%. Increased ringing of ears, plus or minus 10%. Post-op infections, plus or minus 10%. Risk of death, plus or minus 1 to 2%. Other potential side effects: spinal fluid leak, stroke. Sheesh, that is quite the list. My pulse quickened as we contemplated the plans for surgery and the possible complications. Tolan squeezed my hand, and I could feel the slippery sweat accumulating between our intertwined fingers. The doctor left us alone. I looked at the daunting list and dismissed it. It doesn't seem like we have a choice, Tolan said. I agree. Surgery is our only viable option. The tumor is the challenge. After everything that has happened so far, I just can't believe any of that is in store for us. The confidence in my voice surprised me, yet I believed each word. The next days passed quicker than vacation days and slower than the week before Christmas. There was much to do and too much to think about. The more I thought, the less I did. Mom sidekicked as my personal and health assistant. She helped me plan all the scheduling details for my hospitalization, and she was a sounding board for my fears and feelings. The calendar we prepared included preschool and elementary school pickup times, daily practices and games, and contact information for all of the friends who volunteered to help during the week with carpools, meals, and rides. She took me to more appointments, and we tried to prepare ourselves for what was to come. The surgery date loomed only days away, but we'd been encouraged to get other expert opinions before undergoing the risky procedure. One specialist after another provided second, third, fourth opinions and more, and spewed opinions as facts. In another local doctor's office, Mom took laborious notes from the specialist's verbal report. This doctor took a 10-second glance at my scans and declared, "I've seen 3 other cases just like this in the last year. You have an acoustic neuroma." That was when I tuned out. The complete surety and superiority in his voice told me everything I needed to know. For the rest of his monologue, I sat silent. When the physician left the room, Mom turned to me. "Wow, that was good information. I hope I got it all down because I'll never remember everything he said." "You don't need to remember it, Mom. He was wrong. Everything he said was wrong. Dr. Coldwell went through all of this with me in the hospital. He gave me all of the reasons why my tumor isn't a schwannoma or an acoustic neuroma. He said anyone who diagnosed it as such, like some of his residents in training, were relying purely on textbook information and not practice." "What do you mean, Joe?" I couldn't explain all the things Dr. Coldwell told me. I only knew the feeling I had inside. In less than a month, I'd been examined and diagnosed by more than a dozen doctors, neurosurgeons, ENTs, neuro-ENTs, and neurologists. Medical school didn't bullet point my resume, but I believed Dr. Coldwell and trusted his plan. I turned to Mom and attempted to clarify the 2 conflicting doctors' messages. To her credit, Mom didn't need further description of the situation. Once she understood the gist of my words, she laid her notebook at her side. Though new to the world of neurosurgeons, she trusted me and she trusted God. If I knew whom to listen to, so did she. My moment of clarity turned to concern. What about the other patients who come in here each day? What if they believe everything he says without question? His youth, good looks, self-confidence, and title deem him an authority. But this time, I know he is wrong. What happens to those who don't know that? The course prescribed by our 2 chosen doctors was the right path. Though I knew little else, that fact burned in me. Surgery was scheduled to last 4 to 5 hours. The procedure would be completed using a mid-fossa approach, beginning at the right ear and making a large question mark-shaped incision on my head. The plan included a stay in the neurointensive care unit at the University of Utah Medical Center for 1 to 2 days, followed by another 3 to 4 days in the neuroacute care unit, for a total hospital stay of 4 to 6 days. Post-craniotomy protocol dictated that I would not be released until the incision healed and I could walk on my own. At home, we discussed the basics with our young family. After relaying simple facts, Tolan explained that the site of the tumor removal could not be left empty in the brain, so the team planned to take fat from my stomach in a procedure similar to liposuction to fill in the open space in my brain. Using all the humor we could muster, we joked with the kids, who decided my new nickname should be Fathead. We laughed and told our children about the many friends and family members who lovingly stepped forward as volunteers to give up their fat to put in my head. Relieved at the positive turn in the conversation, each of them came up with other funny names that would also apply to Mommy after surgery. Metalhead and Baldy also made the list. Laughter comforted us, even when we were scared for the future. We juggled the pre-surgery days like acrobats. Trendon's 10th birthday celebration came just 4 days before my operation. The previous month had aged him. Already he seemed older, more mature, and emotionally burdened. All I wanted for his birthday was for him to just be a kid, to enjoy his day. He and his friends rollerbladed around the rink, jumped on giant inflatable obstacle courses, and ate pizza. But his face showed his heart was not in it. A lump formed in my throat. I knew that would not be the last time his life revolved around my own. Night settled on the birthday party, and the sun rose on Mother's Day. Trying to savor the days with my family while preparing for the unknown sent us from one emotional day into the next. My counters filled with beautiful flower arrangements, far more than normal for the day honoring mothers. The phone rang, and an older gentleman from my church congregation greeted me. He said, "Happy Mother's Day," before falling silent. "Before you have surgery, I wanted to tell you something." He paused again, heightening my curiosity. "Ms. Brown, no matter what happens, don't let it shake your faith." When I was young and life got hard, I thought God didn't care about me, so I turned away. His voice broke. It took years, most of my life, for me to find my way back. All that time, I could have had his help, but I chose to punish myself by pushing God out of my life. Don't make the mistake I made. He spoke for a few more minutes, and then I thanked him and hung up. Think I've learned that lesson. Even unanswered prayers are better than silent nights. I walked out of the room and tried to put the call from the strange old man out of my mind. Tolan's parents hosted us for a joint Mother's Day dinner and birthday celebration for Trendon. He opened presents, and then Kay and I took turns with our Mother's Day gifts. The usual oohs and ahs accompanied each unwrapped box. Tolan handed me the final present, packaged in aluminum foil, his signature gift wrap. I smiled and thought of all the reasons he'd once given me for using foil. "It's shiny, decorative, heavy-duty, and you don't need tape," Tolan had recited. Long, thin box, jewelry-sized. I raised my eyebrows for a few seconds and wondered what prize lay inside. I lifted the top and gasped at the treasure on the cottony bed in the box. "I took it in and got the stones replaced," Tolan said. He seemed to be searching my face for a reaction. The gold pendant that hung from the necklace had only been mine for a few months. I'd inherited it after my grandma Lisenby passed away a few months earlier. I'd lived with her my freshman year in high school, cementing the bond we'd always shared. When I saw the priceless treasure, I felt guilty for the thoughts I'd originally had. The pendant had lived in Grandma's small jewelry box for years. Absent gems blackened the once golden locket like missing teeth. The frozen hands of a small clock inside showed tarnish and disrepair. Dad rejoiced that each of his daughters inherited one of his mother's keepsakes, but I couldn't remember even seeing her wear it. To me, the pendant looked old, like costume jewelry from a secondhand store. Staring at the polished gold ornament in my hands, complete with a beautiful chain, shiny new stones, and a working clock, I was embarrassed at my previous evaluation of the pendant. "Turn it over." Tolan's hands reached over mine, too anxious to wait for me to do it. Engraved words read, "Verus Lisenby, 1917 through 2009. I wrapped my arms around his neck. "Thank you," I said into his shoulder. "I love it." "I thought you could wear it when you go to your doctor's appointments, so she can always be with you," he whispered into my ear. For weeks, earthly angels had gotten me through every challenge and unforeseen situation, from spontaneous surgery to carpool substitutions to a great birthday party bash. Seeing my grandmother's name on the elegant piece of jewelry was a poignant reminder from my husband that heavenly angels watched out for us too. For a moment, I was on top of the world, not because my prospects had improved, but because I had everything and everyone I needed to get me through whatever was coming. The day before surgery, I lay in the dreaded MRI machine again. The doctors wanted a precise view of the tumor, where it was, and how much it had grown, or shrunk. I had been on steroid therapy in hopes of shrinking the tumor so they could create a precise path from my skull directly to the mass in my brain. In 3 weeks, I'd seen or consulted with more than 25 doctors throughout the country and across multiple health systems. Many of these doctors gave me no promise for the future, while a few spouted overconfident and unqualified assurances. Though I quickly learned the grim facts of the situation, I never really thought I was going to die. I believed I was simply the underdog. Any other thought pricked too deep. When my mind started going there, the downward spiral whirlpooled and threatened to suck me in. My trust rested in God and in my team of doctors, who I hoped would have dead aim in removing my tumor. If I had known then what some of those doctors were saying, or heard the rumors going around town, I'd have been swallowed up for sure. It was a good thing I didn't hear the private conversations, the cries behind closed doors, or the foregone conclusions that surgery day would be my last. No one told me they thought I would die. No one declared this to my parents, most certainly not their friend, a neurologist who told colleagues, "She is a goner, for sure." These words, fears, and tears never made it to me. They stayed tucked away in exam rooms, on medical charts, and in rooms far from my own. Instead, my friends surrounded me at every moment, giving me hope and faith. That is why I got up day after day and declared I was going to win the war. Ignorance truly is bliss. This I know. The unlikely duo of ignorance and naive optimism protected me. The night before surgery, I didn't want to think of anything related to tumors. I knew it could be my last chance, for a while, to celebrate and enjoy life, and I intended to do just that. Before Mother's Day, I'd called my brother-in-law and dad and told them my plan for a girls' night at the spa. My sister Christy was still in Hawaii, but Mom and my sister Tammy were close enough for an evening of pampering and fun, sponsored by their husbands. We arrived at the high-end spa and changed into plush robes. We sipped tea, laughed, and waited. One by one, massage therapists took each of us back to a room for the first of our treatments, a 90-minute massage. A tall man with broad shoulders called my name, then walked me to a room. "My name is Jared. I see you have been to Mindful Women's Spa before. Is there anything specific you'd like for your massage this evening?" "Well, Jared, when you work on me, you'll notice the gnarly knots in my back. I'd love if you could loosen me up a bit. I'm having surgery in the morning, so tonight I just need to relax." "Okay, Jodi, I'm happy to do that. What kind of surgery are you having? Is there anything I need to be aware of when I'm working?" I responded fast. "I'm having brain surgery in hopes of removing a tumor on my brainstem." His body froze, and his eyes shifted, but then Jared straightened his stance to near military form. "I will do everything I can to help you, Jodi." He left the room so I could situate myself on the massage table. When he returned, he turned the lights low and played New Age music in the background. He rubbed lotion into his hands and laid them gently on my back. I sank into the cushion and let Jared work all my anxiety out on the table. By the time his hands returned to a resting position, I was nearly asleep. He stepped back from the table. "Jodi, we are finished." He waited until I turned my head and met his gaze. "I hope that helped. Thank you for coming tonight." "Thank you, Jared. I can't tell you how much I needed that. You have a gift. Thank you for sharing it with me. That was the best massage I've ever had." A wide grin crossed his face. "It was my honor. And good luck tomorrow. I will be thinking about you." He bowed and left the room. I slipped back into my robe and met my mom and sister, where we were seated high on elevated recliner chairs. 3 young ladies entered to begin our pedicures. Tammy joked as usual, and Mom and I chuckled in response. In minutes, we relaxed in a room of new friends. Tammy's nail tech asked if there was a special reason for our night out together, and Tammy didn't hesitate to tell her the truth. The elephant in the room took center stage again. One of the girls bit her lip and then asked, "Are you scared?" "Yes, who wouldn't be? But I know everything is going to be okay." I'd given this answer before. I'll have to wear awful hospital gowns for the next few days, but at least I can choose to wear what I want on my toes. With that comment, the tech smiled and grabbed the tray of colors, stickers, and enhancements for us to select from. I wondered if I should be a little crazy and go bold, but in the end, I picked out a beautiful burgundy polish for the nails and miniature white flowers with glittering gems to accent. Me to a T. I stared at the cute designs on my nails and realized I wouldn't be able to choose what came next in my life so easily. After months of symptoms had spun my life out of control, I silently promised to stay positive, no matter what surgery day held in store. Above all else, I knew I didn't want anything to make me lose myself. The lovely night closed all too quickly. As Tammy prepared to drive home, she stood by her car and turned to me. "It's going to work. I just know it. I'll visit in a few days, and we'll make plans for you to come to my house and get hair extensions when you are out of the hospital. Then you won't even be bald. My friend said she'd do it for you, free of charge. We'll have another girls' day. Maybe not as relaxing as tonight, but it will be good. I promise. Love you, Joe, she said. Then she leaned over and gave me an awkward but heartfelt hug. Wow, thanks, I teased. Well, it may not happen again for a while, so you better write about it in your journal. We laughed before she drove away. Tolan embraced me the minute Mom and I walked through the door. The kids were all in their jammies, playing in the front room. It seemed they'd been waiting for us. We told them all about our fun night and held an impromptu pep rally in our living room. Then I hugged each of my little ones and tucked them into bed. My lips brushed their forehead, and I whispered that I would see them soon. I closed the bedroom door behind me as I left the last room. Only then did the tears fall. My mind was nowhere near sleep. I puttered around the house, packing miscellaneous things and rechecking the lists, schedules, and calendars I'd made for the 5 days I'd be in the hospital. I ate a slice of fruit tart pie, my favorite treat, which my neighbors Eric and Cammie brought over during my spa night. I consumed the perfect last meal before my required fast. Just before midnight, Tolan plopped into our bedroom chair. You ready for bed yet? On a normal evening, I would have dropped from sheer exhaustion, but that night, I did not want to go to sleep. Part of me believed if I just kept moving, kept going, morning wouldn't come. Tolan knew better. You may be able to sleep all day, but I need to be awake enough to drive you to the hospital at 5 a.m. Let's get some rest. I stopped tinkering and exhaled. My whole body shuddered. Okay. Come here, he said. My husband doubled as my shrink, and he knew more than anyone why I didn't want to go to bed. I walked over and sat down on his lap. Tolan wrapped his arms around me. I turned and laid my head on his shoulder. We stayed in that position for several minutes, neither of us saying a word. My chest heaved and occasional gasps escaped my throat. I love you, Jodi Orgill Brown, he said. By this time tomorrow, it will all be over, and in a few days you'll be back at home and here in my arms. He kissed my head, then my lips, and we crawled into bed. Chapter 8. All Sales Final. Just when I think I have learned the way to live, life changes. Hugh Prather. May 13th, 2009. I hung my head over the porcelain bowl and waited for the final convulsions. Strands of long blonde hair brushed the side of my face and stuck to the cold sweat on my cheek. The trembling in my limbs paused just long enough to expunge the last remaining bodily fluids. Wiping my mouth, I leaned against the wall for support. Tears mingled with the saliva that dripped from my chin. My stomach churned with bats more than butterflies. I wished they'd scare the fear out of me. The thought of doctors cutting open my brain made me heave again. Thinking happy thoughts no longer did the trick. My naive ignorance from days before had long since fled, overtaken by the realization of what lay ahead. Hundreds of friends and family members had already showered me with well wishes, good karma, kismet, and luck. Many more would send thoughts to heaven on my behalf that day, probably even the old man on the phone. Still, I cried. Praying was not the problem. I'd often poured my heart out for those I loved. But my new situation made me unsure of what to ask for. Most of the doctors had written me off, given me a death sentence rather than hope. God knew this. Could I be so bold as to ask for a miracle? The old man on the phone had said not to lose my faith, but he'd said nothing about having enough to make a miracle. Doubts about God had rarely entered my mind during my 33 years. I had seen the touch of the Lord's hand in my life too many times to question whether he existed. He is known by different names to different people. Ava, Yehweh, Elah, Allah, Elohim, and Jesus Christ are just a few. No, I did not question his presence, only his path for me. If I dared ask God for a miracle and didn't receive it, would it be because I hadn't enough faith, or because it was God's will? Whisperings from my guide told me everything would be okay. Whether or not God and I had the same definition of okay remained to be seen. The clock read 4:38 a.m. Even after the extended time hugging the toilet and showering, the morning was still waking. Few sounds of movement came from beyond the walls of our home. I thought about the day ahead, but I didn't even know what I hoped for. Prayer had never been so complicated, or tears so simple. Tolan flipped on the lights in the garage and ran ahead to open the car door. Mom held on to me as we walked out to the car. Carefully stepping down the stairs, I glanced ahead of me and saw bright blue letters. I smelled the wood as I neared the enormous painted plywood sign. "Good luck, Jodi. We love you and are praying for you." The sign was covered in notes and well wishes, though there wasn't time to read them all. The tears flowed again. Friends and neighbors from miles around had ensured the last thing I felt as I left home was love. The unknown was overwhelming. The questions were too many, and the answers all indefinite. No amount of planning, psyching, meditating, or calming had prepared me to look mortality in the face and step into the darkness of surgery day. "Please let him get here in time. I need to see him. They can't take me back until he's here. I have to tell him. I need to say." My father's flight from Hawaii landed at the Salt Lake City airport within minutes of my scheduled surgery. Tolan stood by my side, as did my mom, who hadn't left our home since the day after I was diagnosed. But Dad had to work, which kept him 3,000 miles away. By 8 a.m., my day was already 4 hours old. My insides still churned like a sailor's first day at sea, but there was nothing left to empty from my body. The vertigo that nearly swallowed me on the long car ride to the hospital threatened to engulf me again. Worse still, the reality of saying goodbye to the most important people in my world threatened to drown me before the sleepy juice could save me. The morning had already been hard enough, as I kissed each of my 4 little ones while they slept in their beds. Trendon was old enough to understand the gist of it, but lying in his bed that morning, he was relaxed. I hoped it would stay that way through the long day of unknowns. Lindy's dreams hid any concerns her face might otherwise have shown. My little guys, Kaysen and Davin, snoozed, it seemed, without a care in the world. "Dear Father, no matter what happens, please take care of my children. Let them know how much I love them, how much I still want to be their mother." There was no time for my lips to linger, or my tears would wake the beauties. Mom's eyes found mine, jerking me back to the present. No matter how much I wanted to be home getting my kids ready for school, I was in the hospital, waiting for the world to end. The clock screamed that time was running out. Dad still hadn't arrived. I turned my head and looked out the door, safe from the stares of those I loved. I couldn't look into their faces and pretend it was okay. Another few minutes passed in silence. "There's Vaughn," Tolan exclaimed as he looked out the window toward the parking lot. I glanced skyward and closed my eyes. Within minutes, Dad was outside my door, stopping only to shake the hands of those who would soon hold my life in theirs. The room seemed to lighten the instant he walked in. Never mind the thoughts of what lay ahead, his smile was a permanent fixture on his face. "Hiya, Joe," he said with a comforting grin as he gave me a wholehearted embrace. His nickname for me had never sounded so wonderful. Suddenly, there was nothing I needed to say. His eyes told me he already knew the thoughts of my heart. His presence put me at peace, the final signal that it was time to begin. At that point, I could do nothing more. I was in God's hands. Mom looked into my eyes before leaning down for a last hug and kiss on my forehead. She caressed my hand as she held it in hers. Dozens of memories from the previous days flew through my mind. Her fingers running through my hair, sitting beside me on the bed, pushing my wheelchair out of the hospital, and lovingly cooking, cleaning, and playing with my children. My 5'6" frame exceeded hers by 4 inches, yet she was still a giant to me. Despite my being a full-grown woman, she was still my mother. Tolan was last. The man who effortlessly but definitively became my other half stared at me with big brown eyes that spoke pure love to my heart. Then his lips touched mine for a brief moment. I leaned into his warmth, embracing the security I felt only in his arms. "Just hold me. Promise me it won't be the last time." The words screamed in my head, but I couldn't say them out loud. His shoulders already carried the weight of the world. My tears wet his shirt. He let go, and I laid back onto the inclined mattress. As the resident started to wheel my bed into the operating room, the sheet fell off my right foot, and I saw the white flowers shining amidst the deep burgundy on my toes. I remembered my promise from the night before, and vowed again to stay positive and stay me. Before we rounded the final corner, I turned my head towards my loved ones and gave a last smile and wave. The operating room was humming with activity. Noises from all directions competed for my attention. The beeps, hums, and shushes of machines sank behind the forceful tick of the large clock on the wall. The residents buzzed around the room like worker bees, anxious to begin. I saw furtive grins on faces, denoting their interest and anticipation. My face did not mirror theirs, but we had one thing in common. We were ready to begin. Anesthesia, sleep, a nice long nap. These ideas were the only safe thoughts in my mind. Despite not eating or drinking anything since the previous night, I felt the cramping in my stomach and thought I might vomit again. My whole body trembled beneath the white sheet covering me. A nurse brought over a warm blanket, but it did not stop me from shaking. It was not cold that caused me to shiver. The neurosurgery resident smiled faintly, patted my shoulder, and gently took my arm. It was time. The gleam of the needle caught my attention, and I closed my eyes. With the IV in place, tingling drops of anesthesia entered my veins. Cool relief at last. Chapter 9. The Return. I wake up every day and I think, I'm breathing. It's a good day. Eve Ensler. Where am I? I blinked and looked around the dimly lit room. Tolan. Oh, I'm alive. Fading in and out of consciousness for what seemed like hours, I grasped only a few basic details. Tolan sat by the bed, holding my hand. The alertness in his eyes showed he was watching over me, as were my parents. People in white coats and scrubs peered at me from all directions. The long sleep had taken me far away from my cares, and I wasn't sure I wanted to return yet, so I let the anesthesia lure me back to sleep again. Hi, sweetie, Tolan whispered as he rubbed my arm. The way he looked at me made me think this wasn't our first greeting. Was it déjà vu, or had we done this before? You really awake this time? He asked. I glanced around the room and saw a blurry vision of my parents staring at me with comforting smiles. Think so, I said. Dad jumped in, as always, with a buoy in hand. Good news, Joe. Dr. Coldwell told us 85% of the tumor was successfully removed. He hopes the rest will calcify and disintegrate in time. The words didn't sink in. I was still trying to camera zoom focus on the faces in front of me. The mass was sent to a lab for testing, but he thought it looked good, not cancerous. We should know more in a few days. I tried to smile at the news, though my attempt felt weak. Anesthesia blurred time, but blurry was good. Every minute of wakefulness increased the pain. Just sleep. Short visits with Tolan and my parents broke up the long periods of slumber. I welcomed their familiar faces at every revival, but I didn't want to sit up or talk. Even the simplest gesture shot pain through my head. Dad told me the surgery took much longer than expected. He didn't say it, but I knew that meant all my loved ones had many hours of worry and uncertainty. He said the doctors believed they removed most of the tumor, and he gave me a thumbs-up sign to emphasize the good news. The report lulled me into a safety net, and I hoped when I woke again, I could focus on healing and get back to life. Mealtime clued me into a new reality. Pain anchored me to the pillow. The weight and strength of it increased when I lifted my head, so I lay flat and Mom spoon-fed me. I tried to open my mouth, but it wouldn't obey the commands from my brain. No matter what I did, my lips wouldn't part enough for the round end of the spoon to fit inside. She scooped a bite onto the handle end, but the second the food landed on my tongue, it spilled out over my lips and onto my hospital gown. No one had told me I'd revert to spoon-feeding after surgery. I decided the anesthesia still had hold on my body. After several minutes, we gave up on the food, and Mom cleaned up the mess I'd made. I rolled onto my left side to rest. I lay in the only position that kept pressure off the large incision, sprawled across the right half of my head. The doctor's voice made me jump. Why didn't I hear him come in? I turned my head toward the door and saw Mom, Dad, and Tolan, all staring at Dr. Coldwell. They nodded almost in unison as he spoke. The doctor looked right at me and smiled. Glad to see you are awake and more alert. I realized he'd probably been talking to my family for a few minutes. Sorry, I didn't hear you come in, I admitted. That's okay, just checking in to see how you're doing. I understand you are still in quite a bit of pain, which is unfortunately pretty normal. You'll stay on top of the medications, and you'll start to feel better in a few days. I looked over at your charts and the nurse's notes. So far, everything looks good. I'll be back when the clinic closes to check on you again." Dr. Coldwell exited the room, and my anxiety entered. I'd already awoken several times, and I knew I was okay, but a new thought came to my mind, and I had to test my theory. I pressed my fingers to my face. I tried to close my eyes and clear away the haze, but my right eye wouldn't shut. Several seconds passed, and still my vision hadn't focused. The burning in my eye was uncomfortable, scratchy, and raw. Without grasping it, I'd been waiting for cool tears to moisten the dry surface, but none came. My pulse increased, and I inhaled sharply. 3 faces turned toward mine. "What's going on?" I asked. Tolan glanced at my parents and then scooted closer. He rested his hand on my arm. "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure. Is something wrong with my face?" I touched my cheek again. "What don't I know?" "Sweetie, the doctor said your nerves were damaged during the surgery. The right side of your face isn't working." Track horses raced across my mind, the lead horse carrying my suspicions from moments before. "They don't want you to worry. The paralysis should only last a few days or weeks, and then you will be back to normal. Dr. Coldwell said the nerves looked good." Tolan wore a brave mask, and I desperately wanted to believe him. "Why didn't Dr. Coldwell tell me?" "He did. He came in earlier and talked to all of us, but I don't think you were really coherent then." "Paralysis? The nerves look good, so why the paralysis? What does that mean?" I mumbled. "From what I understand, it means they look good for recovery," Tolan reiterated. "So this is temporary. I guess I can do anything for a few weeks." "The paralysis affects your right eye, too. That's why it doesn't close. You've been sleeping with it open, so it's probably dry and irritated." Tolan's tone sounded reassuring, but his words killed the effect. "What about my ear? I can hear you, but I didn't hear Dr. Coldwell come in." "We noticed you haven't responded when you were on your left side, probably because you can't hear much out of your right ear. The doctors weren't sure, but with the path they had to cut to get to the tumor, they warned us that you might have lost hearing in that ear." The combination of all the news ripped through me like an explosion, sending shockwaves in every direction. For a moment, I couldn't separate dreams from reality. "Oh, dear God, help me get through this." The first few words of my plea to heaven stopped me in my tracks. There were many things I still needed to say to God. "Thank you, dear Father, for my life, for preserving me and giving me a second chance. I'm so grateful for my family, to see their faces again, and—" I halted again as another realization hit. I was alive, but I had no idea of what was in store for me or my family. A dark-haired CNA escorted me and my IV tower companion to the bathroom. "If you need anything, just press this button," she said, pointing to a switch on the wall. "I will be waiting right outside the door, just in case." I pulled the privacy curtain around me and braced myself for what I would see. But the preparation was not enough. Shock jolted through me at the sight in the mirror. The right half of my face appeared inanimate. My eye opened wide and glossy, my mouth hanging open with my lips drooping at the end and my cheek sagging. I was grateful bandages still covered my head. One surprise was enough. I turned my head from side to side to further examine the details of this mask I couldn't take off. It could be an interesting few weeks until the nerves returned. Purposefully looking away from the mirror, I grabbed the toothbrush, smeared it with paste, and started brushing, the same way I had my entire life, but this time with different results. Like a shot of Novocaine had deadened my control, my mouth drooled lather all over my chin and gown. My reflection hinted at what facial paralysis actually meant. I shifted my weight to lean closer to the sink, but I tipped to the right, nearly losing my balance, physically and mentally. The CNA knocked on the door before I could steady myself. When she peeked her head in and asked if I needed help, neither of us could deny the facts. She grabbed my waist and brought her other arm around to my shoulder and then chaperoned me the 12 feet to my bed. The cover sheltered my body, but not my mind. I'm still me, I reminded myself. An unsettling feeling started in the pit of my stomach. Though I tried to convince myself otherwise, I felt like some of my identity had been excavated along with the mass, replaced by a vague look-alike. When, or if, the real me would ever return was a mystery. I hoped she would come back soon. The first 2 days passed like a long, dark ice age where I lay trapped, never fully thawing from the comatose state. Heavy sedatives and painkillers relieved the pressure in my head and forced frequent bouts of slumber. Each time I woke to see if sleep had liberated me from the pain. At 8:30 on Friday morning, the room hummed with activity. Half a dozen residents stood with clipboards in hand. They parted like the Red Sea as Dr. Coldwell stepped in. "Good morning, Jodi. We are going to take the bandages off today. How do you feel about that?" I believed I was more ready for that than I was for the paralysis, but I took a heavy, slow breath and replied, "Nervous." "That's pretty normal. After we finish patient rounds, I'll return to remove the bandages and we'll get a good look. It will be okay." His voice was upbeat. I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. "For now, tell me how you are feeling while I look at your chart." "My head hurts all the time," I admitted, embarrassed at the sets of notes being taken. What else could I expect after brain surgery? "The nurse said my medication is maxed out, so I'm trying to stay flat and still to keep it from getting worse." "Wish I could tell you there won't be any more pain, but all patients report it is part of the recovery process," he said. He finished looking over the charts before he led the parade out the door. Dad and Tolan both arrived at the hospital by mid-morning. Dr. Coldwell returned a few hours later, shadowed by his right-hand resident. The thin Asian man seemed sharp but quiet, more ready to observe than to take charge. I guessed Dr. Coldwell's calm, quiet manner made it easy for residents to learn from him, but I didn't doubt that when a situation called for it, the modest doctor transformed into a confident quarterback. The two greeted us and started preparations. After they gathered the needed supplies, Dr. Coldwell rolled a stool to my bed. "Here we go." The tape tugged at the tender skin on my head, and I grimaced. "Sorry, the first part is always the hardest." He went back to work. "There. Now that the corner's up, I can use this handy liquid to remove the tape so it doesn't pull as much." Dr. Coldwell poured drops of a cool fluid on my head and smoothed it down the incision with a long Q-tip. I imagined him pouring Goo Gone on my head. He used pencil-sized tweezers to remove the large bandage. "Is that pulling too much?" "No, it's better now," I answered. Whatever it was, it worked. The rest of the tape pulled off easily, with fewer frowns on my part. He leaned closer, wiped the skin with a cotton ball, and stared at my head. "The scar is healing nicely. You will be sore enough that you won't want to sleep on your right side for at least 2 months, but you should return to normal routine after that. Do you want to take a look?" He turned toward the tray of tools, and I saw a large hand mirror. Before I made any decisions, I looked at Tolan for a sign. His lips were tight, not quite in a grin, but not a frown either. Stoic. He said nothing. He was inspecting. What if I don't like what I see? Do I want Dr. Coldwell here for that? "I think I'll wait a little while to check it out. I'll take your word on it for now," I replied. Tolan nodded. "How long until you take the staples out?" "The staples will stay in for a few more days. We like to give them a full week so the incision seals before they come out." Dad, Tolan, and I were all okay with his answer. He'd mentioned time frames before surgery, but it was a whole different story when it was reality. Dad and Dr. Coldwell chatted and then shook hands, and Dad waved as the doctor and head resident left the room. He and Tolan acted as my advocates, even when I was awake. Tolan seated himself by me on the bed. "Well, how are you really?" "That depends, I guess. How bad is it?" "The scar is longer and the staples are bigger than I expected. You're not going to like it, but it's not too bad." I couldn't tell if he was trying to prepare me for the worst or just taking it all in himself. He grabbed the mirror. "You ready?" "No, I don't think so. Give me a few more minutes," I insisted. Dad grabbed the camera and told me to smile. "Maybe it will be easier for you to see it on a little screen than in a big mirror," he suggested. I liked the idea. Before I went into the hospital, I'd told Tolan to take pictures of everything to document our brain tumor journey. I hoped one day I'd look back at the photos and see how far I'd come. In that moment, viewing my scar on a 2-inch camera screen seemed a better option than a mirror. Dad snapped a photo, glanced at it, then handed me the camera. I looked at the tiny image. The giant scar turned in the shape of a backwards question mark. The skin had been cut from in front of my ear, the incision curving up until it reached an inch from the peak of my skull. The photo was clear, but small, so the patches of dried blood were not so disturbing. Below my ear, I could see the word, "Yes," written in marker, the hospital's safeguard to make sure the incision was made on the correct side. I gasped. How many staples are there? The question popped out of my mouth too fast to disguise my shock. Well, I haven't counted. The staples are bigger than I expected, so there aren't as many as I thought there would be, Tolan said, getting closer to inspect. Don't know what I was expecting, but I don't think this was it. I thought they'd only shave a small section of my head, and I didn't think the incision would be so big, I explained, hoping my voice wasn't too shaky. I couldn't stop looking at the picture, but I didn't break down or even cry. I stared and analyzed, and still couldn't believe it was me. You ready for this? Dad asked. He spoke almost the minute I woke up from my afternoon nap. Tolan had gone back to work, I suspected, and Mom occupied the seat he'd been in before I went to sleep. I'm going to read the comments on the blog. There are already hundreds of notes from friends, family, and even strangers who've heard about you. This is pretty incredible. Let's hear them, I said groggily. Get your beauty rest, my friend. Sleep like a princess. Hope your recovery is swift, but the prayers on your behalf will continue either way. Love to you, Brittany. I never thought I'd actually miss my morning runs, but I think I will, or at least my running buddy. I bet, Mom agreed. Here's one from Carol Liptrot, Dad said. I couldn't think about Carol without thinking about Steve. He'd been gone for 5 years, and I'd wondered if she was reliving his brain tumor ordeal through mine. Thank you for the many updates. We care so much. I think you look great, Jodi. I know the pain and other discomforts will slowly improve, and you will feel a little better each day. I am so thankful for the doctors being guided in their surgery, and that they were able to accomplish so much. Sleep and rest. Things will be better soon. Love you, Carol Liptrot and family. Okay, here's the next one, from Annette. Those are some tough pictures to look at, and it makes all of us appreciate what you are all going through. We are so happy to hear she is doing well. Thank you so much for the updates. You don't know how much we all appreciate it. We are thinking of all of you and your family and keeping you in our prayers. Love, Annette. Pictures? You posted the pictures on the blog? Yes, hope that's all right. I thought everyone would understand things a little more once they saw the photos, Dad said. I nodded my okay. It made sense, and I'd been the one who told my family to take lots of pictures. But I wondered what my friends and family would think when they saw me. Here's one from Kathy. Jodi and family, I'm so glad to hear that you are doing well. You look great. I can't wait to talk to you in person and tell you that I am having a little girl. Our thoughts and prayers are with you always. Love, Kathy and family. A girl! I'm so excited for Kathy and Doug. That is great news. I'm so glad she told me. I could hardly think of my good friends without smelling the aroma of freshly baked bread, one of Kathy's signature talents. We considered ourselves fortunate any time she treated us to a fresh 9-grain or honey whole wheat loaf. On a really lucky day, a small tub of fresh strawberry jam accompanied the hot, soft bread. I knew she regularly shared her homemade baked goodness with families in the neighborhood. She thrived on helping others, which explained something else. So Annette says the pictures are tough to look at, but Kathy thinks I look great. I suspect that is because Kathy is a nurse. She's probably used to treating patients like me. Annette, and I, may not be as used to such sights. Makes sense to me, Dad said. Personally, I have to agree with both of them. It's a tough situation, but I still think you look great, Joe. I really do. I understood parents' love for their children, but the sincere tone in my father's voice took unconditional to a new level for me. Alrighty, this one is from Martin Merks. Now, remind me who that is? I recognize his name, Dad said. Tolan's cousin, Kayleen and Bill's son. Oh, that's right. Here goes. I had facial paralysis for 3 weeks. Ugh, Bell's palsy. It's annoying more than anything. Be patient with it, Jodi. That nerve takes a lot of time to rejuvenate. You'll get used to biting your lip when you eat. That's right, I'd forgotten about that. Martin probably knows what I'm going through better than anyone else. Maybe I ought to ask him for advice. His Bell's palsy sounded just like this. Might not be a bad idea. Okay, here's the next one from Wendy. Wendy Jeffries? Mom asked. Yep, but now she is Wendy Johnston, Dad replied. I am glad that things went as well as they did, and they were able to remove so much of the tumor. I have been reading all of the updates and will continue to pray for a speedy recovery from this surgery. Please give Jodi a hug from me and tell her we are praying for her in Virginia. Lots of love to you all. Growing up, if I could have chosen a third sister, it would have been Wendy. She was the best girlfriend I ever had. In the cruel years filled with teenage angst, she was my BFF, shopping buddy, and friend for every dateless Friday night. Her note was just what I needed. The words of each message played through my mind again. It wasn't just close friends who reached out. The list included kindergarten companions, high school buddies, college roommates, family friends, colleagues, and dozens of strangers who'd happened onto the blog. Nearly every person said they were praying for me. That seemed like a lot of petitions to God on my behalf. I sat up a little in bed and attempted to smile. I wanted to be worthy of the kind pleas and hope. Chapter 10. Companions. Good company in a journey makes the way seem shorter. Isaac Walton. May 15th, 2009. The curtains by the door parted. "Joe, you have a visitor," Mom announced. "Debbie, come in," I motioned. The effect of seeing her was a caffeine shot for my soul. Though she didn't need to visit to prove her friendship, I suspected friendship premeditated her decision. The last time I'd seen her, she'd shown up at my house, right after my diagnosis, just to give me a hug. Debbie had a medicinal effect on me, pumping me with endorphins that masked the pain. She leaned to embrace me. "You better rest while you have the chance. I promise I'll take it easy on you in Sun Valley, but I don't know if the kids will do the same." The favorite family vacation destination could be healing too. Just hearing the name lifted me even higher. "Sun Valley sounds like a good alternative to the hospital," Dad piped in. "If Debbie is taking care of you, I know you'll be in good hands. Maybe we can con Tolan and Brandon into taking the kids to the pool so we can have a girls' night. It's about time. We've only talked about it for 5 years, Debbie chuckled. "Don't worry. I promise to be good and rest, but I'm not going to miss the candy store. Who would pass up on overpriced chocolate and sour gummy worms?" I laughed. If there's overpriced chocolate, or chocolate of any kind, I may just have to accompany you on this trip," Mom said. "There are overpriced massages too, which is why we always talk about it, but never end up actually getting one," Debbie said. Hundreds of recollections cluttered my mind. I smiled at the images of picnics, hikes, biking, sleigh rides, fires, movies, pinochle, Redfish Lake, and almost massages. On our first trip together to Sun Valley more than 10 years earlier, Debbie and I had spit into Drano crystals, supposedly a predictor of the sex of our babies. We were due only a month apart. The Drano test said she was having a boy and I was having a girl. Wrong, on both accounts. But everything was right about Debbie. She leaned over and hugged me again. "You are amazing, Jodi. You always have been, but now you're outdoing even yourself." She kissed my forehead and then picked up her purse. "Love you, Deb. Thanks for the visit," I said. "Yes, thanks for stopping by," Mom said as Debbie walked out the door. Mom turned to me, her face bright and smiley. "Well, that was nice of Debbie." "That is Debbie, thoughtful and giving. She is always an upper for me." I paused for a moment. "But I don't feel amazing." "What do you mean?" Mom asked. "Debbie said I'm amazing. Several people have said that lately. But I don't feel amazing. I'm just trying to get through this." "Yes, but there are many ways you could get through it. The fact that you are choosing to be positive and keep smiling inspires lots of people," Mom said. "And I'm sure it reminds them that their own lives aren't so bad either," Dad added. "Facing problems with faith and optimism makes for a pretty powerful combination, and you're doing both." I still didn't feel amazing, but I decided they were right. Being positive is a choice, and with my newly acquired facial paralysis, that decision could be critical for me. It was Friday afternoon. I wondered what I would be doing if I were home. The kids would likely be playing outside, enjoying the warmth of burgeoning summer days. I'd probably be sitting on my front porch, watching the chaos, or visiting with my neighbors. Then it hit me. That night, my neighbors wouldn't be just casually chatting in the cul-de-sac. They would be preparing. "Dad, will you put a post on the blog for me?" "Of course, Joe. What do you want me to say?" "Please wish all my runner friends good luck. Tomorrow is the Ogden Marathon." I pictured the beautiful canyon my friends, Heidi, Heather, and Sean, all siblings from a super active family, would be jogging the next morning. Half the neighborhood would be racing, and not just the Kerrigan family. Though I didn't envy the actual run, I wished I could be there with them. Thoughts of my friends pushing the limits of their physical bodies made me think maybe I could do the same. With my husband and parents taking turns visiting me in the hospital, my only other wish was to see my sweet children. Friday night couldn't arrive soon enough. Both exciting anticipation and trepidation for their visit coursed through me. Dad and Mom left to take a much-needed break. I sat alone in my room, waiting for my little ones to arrive. My whole body stirred with restlessness. Still uncomfortable sitting up, I turned from my back to my side, trying to get comfy for their arrival. I readied myself to show them that I was alive and grateful to still be their mother. The usually rambunctious group tiptoed into the room. "Hi, guys," I blurted. "I'm so glad to see you. Come give me hugs." The two oldest smiled, but walked slowly to my bedside. Then, lively, kind little Kaysen ran over and embraced me. When he let go, he stood next to Trendon and Lindy, all of them just a few feet from me, but they felt miles away. Davin, my 2-year-old blue-eyed towhead and youngest son, stayed back, holding onto Tolan's leg. A minute later, he climbed onto the windowsill, away from my bed. When Tolan tried again to inch him over, he wouldn't look at me. His body shrank away. I reached out to him, but he tightened and froze. He didn't touch me. He seemed too afraid to hug me. With the right half of my head shaven and covered in staples, my eye large and glossy, and my mouth drooping, I supposed my face held little resemblance to the mother he knew. Can't he tell it's me? If I were hidden from their sight, I would have cried a river. To my sweet 2-year-old boy, I probably appeared more movie-like than real. I was sure Tolan had warned them about my appearance. He hadn't told me so, but I knew he would want to make it as easy on the children as possible. But their reactions confirmed the truth. Words couldn't change the live scene in front of them. "I love you, little Dee. I'm so glad to see you," I said from across the room. Tolan carried him over and lifted him onto the bed. I gave Davin a quick, unreturned hug and let him free himself from me. I tried not to break down as he toddled away. One by one, Tolan ushered them toward me. "Go ahead, Trendon." Trendon stepped forward, his face echoing the concern he must have felt. He seemed to know my situation was not better. Old enough to hear the whispers on the phone and to understand the talk of the adults, his expression said he knew I was not coming home yet. "You doing okay, Mom? Does your head hurt from the surgery and staples?" His question was honest and insightful. He seemed worried about his mama. "I'm okay, buddy. The hardest part is being away from you guys," I said, poking him so he could see my playful side again. He leaned over and put his arms around me. "Thanks, Trendon. I love you," I whispered. "I sure miss you. Dad says you're fasting and praying for me." "Yeah, I am," he smiled weakly. "I appreciate you, bud. More than you know," I said as I hugged him again. He still looked like a 4th-place finisher. Kaysen, at 4 years old, opened up the most, but his questions showed his apprehension. "Did it hurt when they put the staples in your head?" "No. I was asleep, so I didn't feel a thing." "That's good, 'cause it looks like it would have hurt if you were awake." "Probably so, Mr. C. I bet you're right." "How do you eat when your mouth is so crooked?" "I'm doing the best I can, but it sure is weird. I put food in my mouth and it falls right back out." I answered honestly, but lightheartedly. "It's like when Davin was little and we gave him baby food. He got more on his clothes than down his throat. Do you remember that?" "Yeah, I remember," he grinned. "Your eye is really big. Can you close it when you go to sleep?" "Well, Case, it isn't working too well, that's for sure." "Maybe you could tape it shut," he suggested. "That's a good idea. The nurse mentioned that. I will have to try it." "We have tape at home. I could bring some next time," he offered. I couldn't help but smile at my brave little boy who knew I was still me. "Why do I have to sit on this side so you can hear me? Did they cut your ear? It looks pretty okay." His honesty refreshed me. No holding questions in. He was asking. "They did cut my ear, but not on the outside, on the inside. So it looks okay, but I can't hear out of it anymore." "Kinda crazy, huh?" I replied as gently as possible. "Uh-huh. You sure are a metalhead, Mom," he said, staring at my scar again. "Yeah, but I'm the coolest metalhead around, right?" "Yep." He leaned closer and squeezed me tight. "Love you, Mr. C. I'm so glad you came to visit. I miss you, little dude. It had never been so true. I miss you, too. Grandma Brown didn't make the toast like you do. She put on more butter and forgot the honey. Tolan and I chuckled. Well, she knows now, I responded. Kaysen grinned at me and seemed content with all the answers to his questions. Lindy's shoulder-length brown waves were unkempt and hung in her face. She had grabbed a chair and sat stoically beside my bedside. With Tolan's urging, she softly brushed what was left of my hair. At 7 years old, she was in between a big kid and a little kid, but her brave face looked forced. That feels so good, sweetie. We knew they would shave some of my head, but we didn't practice any styles that would work with only half a head of hair, I said, hoping to make her laugh. She leaned over and gave me a hug, but didn't speak. Her eyes were glassy, as though her mind was far away. She rarely looked into my face, but she stayed right by my bed. She later told me my appearance had frightened her so much she had nightmares where she couldn't find me because she didn't recognize my face. It was no wonder she didn't want to look at me on that first day. One by one, they each got a little more comfortable exploring in the room. They found gloves in the drawers, a notepad and pen on the side table, and strange-shaped bins everywhere. They looked out the window and talked to each other about the U on the mountain and the helicopter that flew overhead. I tried to join in their conversations, but they still shied away from me, except Kaysen. Davin never left Tolan's side. I'd dreamed about their visit and waited for 3 long, painful days, but my body and head burned with each passing second. I was exhausted. It had been 30 minutes. Well, get ready. We're going to go home, guys. Tell Mom goodbye, and we'll go get some dinner before we drive back. Tolan was a good, in-charge guy. He lifted Davin onto the bed. When I hugged him, he turned his face from mine, but he did return my hug before Tolan lowered him. Lindy put her hand on my shoulder and leaned into me. I miss you, Mom, she whispered. Miss you too, Lindy Lou. Trendon gave me another hug, then waved as he turned to go. Love you, he said. Kaysen was the last of the kids to leave me. I will try to remember the tape next time, Mom, for your eye. Thanks. I love your face, Mr. C. What would I do without you? I whispered. He shrugged his shoulders and broke into a grin. Hang in there, hun, Tolan said. It will be easier for them next time. I love you. I'll be back tomorrow. I nodded and tried to hold the emotions in. In seconds, they were gone and the room was empty. My insides ached. I lowered the bed back to a flat position, grabbed a pillow, and tried to muffle my sobs. I didn't know what I had expected, but that wasn't it. Instead of soothing my fears and mending my heart, the visit from my children knocked me down again. No matter what we'd talked about before surgery, we were not prepared for reality. Chapter 11. United. Resilience is accepting your new reality, even if it's less good than the one you had before. You can fight it, you can do nothing but scream about what you've lost, or you can accept that and try to put together something that's good. Elizabeth Edwards. Saturday morning brought little change in the hospital routine. The light flipped on at 4 a.m., as usual, but I opened my eyes to an unfamiliar face. It was a rude awakening from a crummy night's sleep. I'm here to draw your blood, he said flatly. I don't get weekends off, I kidded. Nope, and neither do I, the stranger replied. Do the doctors still do rounds on Saturdays? Usually it's just the residents on the weekends, but sometimes the doctors show up. Just depends, he said. He wasn't super friendly, but at least he knew the answers. After the pin pokes were over, I slept for a few more hours. When the residents showed up, I was not surprised to see an unidentified doctor leading the group. They asked the same questions they asked on other days and performed the same little neurological tests. Follow my finger with your eyes, he said. Good. How many fingers am I holding up? 2. Have you noticed any changes in your vision or pain? I supposed the assessments and questions benchmarked my progress, but it was day 4, and the twice-a-day routine had gotten old. Judging from the way they scrawled my responses and then walked out of the room, I had passed their tests. The nurse entered next and prepped me for a shot in my abdomen, the injection I needed up to 4 times every day to keep my body from having seizures. The dense medicine that plunged into me always left a mark. A 4-millimeter circle decorated my skin after each dose. No one had told me how long the pink scars would last, but with each, my stomach further resembled a connect-the-dots puzzle. When the last scrubs-clad worker left, my surroundings quieted. Without all the weekday workers scurrying around, the hospital stilled to a gentle hum, a perfect chance to rest. Being down wasn't an option when Tammy was around, not even after brain surgery. My younger sister showed up with our brother, Scott, for a most welcome surprise visit. "Yay, come in," I said as I saw their faces. 4 years younger than me, with long dark hair, a thin frame, and tanned skin, Tammy looked more like a model than a mother of 4. Scott and I, in stark contrast to Tammy, looked like siblings. His build was much larger than mine, and his military training had given him broader shoulders and a thick physique, but his hair color and smile matched mine. The room bustled with life the minute they entered. "Hey, Jode," said Scott as he leaned over and wrapped his arms around me. I needed all the embraces I could get. "Well, how are ya?" Tammy asked in the same tone she would use on any normal day. That was part of why I loved Tammy, and needed her so much. She acted like life was normal, even when it wasn't. She didn't panic, whine, or complain about situations. She faced them with courage, smiles, and faith. She left me notes on the blog every day with crazy messages just to make me smile. "I love you more than my vacuum," and "I love you more than the Cheesecake Factory" were some of my favorite posts. For those who knew Tammy, they knew what a compliment it was to be on the list of her favorites. Sisterly love is one thing, but it only goes so far when compared to freshly vacuumed floors, firecracker salmon rolls, and chicken club sandwiches. I was honored to make the grade. Seeing her was even better than hearing Dad read me her funny notes on the blog. Then, Susie's smiling face appeared at the door, another wonderful surprise. Susie had been our neighbor when we moved to Utah, and she just fit with our family in every way. She was Tammy's best friend, and we considered her as another Orgill sister. The 3 of them sat with me and chatted about all sorts of non-hospital topics. The more abstract the topic, the better. The conversation was light and fun, and when we did get around to medical chatter, they kept it upbeat. "Well, at least you get to sleep in a cool hospital bed. You gotta love pressing that button and going up and down," Tammy teased. "I used to love the old hospital bed at Grandma Lisenby's house. I've always wanted one of those." Susie was a nurse at the neighboring children's hospital, so she promised to visit often. I replied that her happy, dimpled cheeks were always welcome. Her job at Primary Children's Medical Center also meant she knew the inside scoop on how things worked and what to do for action and fun in the hospital. "Come on, Susie, maybe Joe would feel a little better if you spiked her IV. Give her the hard stuff. Lemonade," Tammy suggested. Susie laughed and shook her head. "The kids usually prefer distraction, so I'm better at making balloon characters out of latex gloves," she chimed. "I also know where they stash the snacks. You know, the airplane-sized bags of chips and pretzels. I will bring over the goods. All you have to do is say the word." We all thought lemonade in a bag of chips sounded pretty good. "You will not still be here at Halloween," Susie ordered, "but you'd get a kick out of my costume. I am the best-dressed witch on the floor. My neon-striped tights are always envied." "By the nurses or the patients?" I asked. "Oh, I know the children love them, but the nurses are totally jealous. Not sure if they wear costumes here. I bet my hospital is way more fun." Secretly, I was glad we weren't at Susie's hospital. I'd rather be the pincushion than watch my children get poked and prodded. They talked, I listened, we all laughed. As wonderful as it was to be with Scott and Tammy, it made my heart ache all the more for my other 4 siblings, all of whom were 3,000 miles away in Hawaii. I was used to not seeing my brothers and sister on a regular basis, but lying in the hospital made me miss them more than usual. I realized how much of their lives I missed out on, and hoped I would have the chance to catch up soon. Susie took a picture of me with Tammy and Scott on either side of my bed. We weren't a perfect family, but we loved each other nonetheless. When Susie, Scott, and Tammy left, some of the joy stayed with me. Only 20 hours had passed since their first outing to the hospital, but I decided to make some changes before my most important little visitors came again. Instead of my big glossy eye, which only heightened my children's awareness that something was wrong, I donned a dark pirate patch to cover the unsettling appearance. Enlisting the help of the hospital staff, we made the room as child-friendly as possible. The kind medical attendants brought drinks, snacks, latex gloves for balloons, and extra dry erase markers so the kids could write on the whiteboard in my room. Whether I was just more prepared for them or they were more prepared for me, I'll never know. "Hi, Mom," the the little voices exclaimed in unison as they walked in my room. My mom followed them in, with Tolan at the back. Trendon, Lindy, and Kaysen came right up to the bed. Davin hesitated and then joined the others a moment later. With my husband and 4 children at my bedside, I was whole. "I forgot the tape for your eye, Mom," Kaysen blurted. "It's okay, buddy. The nurses found some here at the hospital for me to try," I replied. "I'll let you know how it works." He nodded. Mom lifted Davin onto the bed. I pulled him into my arms and rested my cheek against his. It seemed he was still unsure, but he stayed in my grasp. He and Kaysen wanted to ride on the hospital bed, so Kaysen hopped up and pressed the button to lower the bed. They rode on my bed and then ate the food off my tray. Their excitement at the little adventures thrilled me. Anything to make them more comfortable so they knew I was still Mom and they were safe and loved with me. After an hour, 7 restless bodies were too much for the small room, so Mom took the kids home. Tolan encouraged me to sleep and ventured off in search of food. He returned full, but fidgety. "I know you've had visitors all day, but you've still been stuck in the room. I've only been at the hospital an hour, and I'm ready to get out. Let's go." The spin in a wheelchair around the unit provided the change of scenery I needed. The long halls were capped at either end by double doors that required code cards for entrance. Outside the gates, windows lined the walkways, showing the mountains falling into shadow. We remained only a football field away from my room, but the adventure rejuvenated my body and soul. We turned the final corner back, and Tolan pressed the button to get onto the neuro floor. He pushed me back down the hall into my room. I heard few sounds other than the beeps and ticks of machines. Most rooms were dark and quiet, though a few emitted voices from televisions. The lack of visitors in the neuroacute care unit disturbed me. I wondered how long my hospital neighbors had been guests at the establishment. The need for quiet and sterile space was obvious, but I questioned how the patients felt, alone in a less than welcoming environment. As we exited the wheelchair ride, I felt thankful for regular visitors and the small floral shop in my room. My dad loves to tell the story of my first grade year in elementary school when he and my mom walked by the classroom and found me sitting at the teacher's desk. "Where's Mrs. Loftall?" Mom asked. "She had to run an errand and left me in charge," I replied. They'd laughed, probably in shock, but they also knew I liked to be in charge. Tolan learned the same lesson years later. After we were married, he worked full-time and attended school to earn an MBA. When he finished, I returned to college for a master's degree. When we decided to have a second child, the obsessive-compulsive monster in me wanted to plan it out, simply add it to the calendar. "Okay, the best time to have a baby is in between semesters," I said, pointing at the calendar. Between terms would give me time to be home with the baby, get settled into a routine before school starts again. Tolan looked at me with raised brows and a half smile, but still, he said nothing. Perhaps he was thinking how ridiculous I sounded or how some things in life can't be controlled. But whatever he thought, he kept it to himself. When I finally had our sweet little girl, long after I'd planned, it was the middle of a semester. But my baby needed me, and that bumped all scheduled events. Lindy taught me I couldn't always be in control. I snapped back to the present, looked around, and realized the brain tumor forced me, yet again, to accept some things in life were clearly not on my terms. Tolan helped me back to bed and kissed me before he left. A light knock sounded on the door, and Dr. Shelton stepped in. I was surprised to see him on a Saturday evening. "How are you feeling tonight?" he asked. My explanation must have sounded normal because he made notes on a chart, but his face showed nothing unusual. "Pain isn't easing up at all yet?" His eyebrows rose at the question. "No, it doesn't seem to be getting any better." "I can change your pain medication. We can see if that helps." I nodded and thanked him, hoping it would. "One more thing," I blurted, doubtful if I should even bring it up. His head turned back to me and his eyes met mine. "My nose runs whenever I sit up." "Does your pain increase when you sit up?" he asked. I mentally reviewed the previous day. "Yes." "What happens when you lie back down?" "The pain decreases, but doesn't go away." "And the fluid? Does it stop dripping?" he asks. "No, it trickles down my throat." The description of the process brought the taste into my mouth. I told him the drippy liquid was salty, like Gatorade without any flavor. "Sit up. Let's see what happens," Dr. Shelton said as he crouched next to my bed. He put his hand on my back and gently sat me up. I waited for the pain to arrive with its normal clock-like precision. Within seconds, fluid dripped from my nose. He used a tissue to catch the drops and then grabbed a small flask from the drawer by the bed. Several millimeters of the watery substance filled the tube before my headache spiked to a new level. "We're going to test this, but I am pretty sure it is spinal fluid," he stated. My eyes opened wide. A spinal fluid leak? No, not again. "Did the nurses tell you about spinal fluid leaks?" he questioned. "No, but I had one a few weeks ago after a spinal tap. It took a blood-patched procedure to fix it." Just remembering the event made me cringe. He flipped through the pages of my folder. "Was the procedure done here?" "No, it was at McKD, about 5 or 6 days after the spinal tap. They contacted medical records here to get information on the site where the needle was inserted, but it wasn't even in the computer yet, so they did the surgery without it." I told him all I could remember about the incident. Dr. Shelton took copious notes, filling the bottom of a page and turning it to the back. "I hope this doesn't mean you are prone to leaks, but the fluid in the flask may indicate otherwise. Post-surgery leaks occur in fewer than 10% of patients, but if it's happened to you before, I'm betting that is causing the extreme pain. It takes a few days, but leaks usually seal on their own. If it is a leak, we'll need to keep you here until it seals. I'm leaving soon and I won't be in tomorrow, but as soon as we have the results, I'll have someone let you know. I promise, we'll get you an answer soon. Hang in there." The nurse walked in the room and he told her the news before they exited simultaneously. I heard the computer keys tapping at the nurse's station right outside my room. Let that be the order for new painkillers. With the room empty, I reclined the bed until I was horizontal again. Streaks of doubt smeared my mind like muddy windshield wipers. The results didn't take long. Dr. Shelton returned less than an hour later. The test came back positive. It is cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. The clear fluid surrounds the brain and acts as a cushion or buffer for the cortex. If a leak causes the pressure to drop, when the patient sits up, the fluid flows down the spine, robbing the brain of the cushion effect. It generates debilitating headaches. The body usually heals itself, but there are other options we can take if needed. Hopefully the leak seals on its own in another day or two. In the meantime, I've instructed the nurses to increase your dosage of pain medication. And, as you've already discovered, you'll be more comfortable if you stay lying down. "What happens if it doesn't seal on its own?" I asked. "Well, I wish I could say a simple blood patch would do the trick, but with a leak coming from the brain, it isn't that simple. If it doesn't seal, we will manually close it, though surgery is rarely required. Hang tight. Let's give your body time to heal itself." My resolve turned to oatmeal. I hoped he was right and my body would repair itself. He turned to go. "I'll call in tomorrow, and I'll be back Monday morning to see how you are doing. I'm sure this is discouraging, but give it a few days. It will be okay," he reassured me. The door closed, shutting me in alone. The first leak had required surgery. I hoped for a better outcome the second time. Though surgeons enlisted numerous precautions to protect my brain function and nerves, I experienced facial paralysis, hearing loss, and a spinal fluid leak. Nearly all of the major side effects, short of death.